international webinar organized by FIAN Colombia, FIAN International, and Urgency to talk about care. And listening to this music, which is care that always accompanies us. So in this virtual forum that we will be building today, we will be tackling the topic of care and to begin to think around care as a right and as an essential element for the exercise of human right to nutrition and to food. We will be having a dialogue with a whole diversity of people, experiences, territories, looking at it from the academia, civil society, the different movements from politics, because it's important to recognize, first of all, that care is a fabric of complete interdependent relationships that coexist, as are the relationships in the food systems in all their complexity. So the idea today is, first and foremost, to greet those of you that will be following us on our live streaming on Facebook and YouTube, the pages here in Colombia. And before we start going straight to what we will be doing in these next 3 hours, I would like to give you some indications regarding care for this session. First of all, to tell you that this session has simultaneous translation available, English into Spanish and vice versa. You can access this translation if you're connected through Zoom. You go to an icon, which is the world globe, at the bottom of your screens, or just clicking on the 3 dots that you will have next to it, and you will have access to the interpretation service in this webinar. So first and foremost, our thanks to those of you that will be responsible for the interpretation, for your support, and for allowing us to understand each other. You will also have access to interpretation. If you're following us on live stream on Facebook and YouTube, you'll be able to select the version in Spanish or in English. Our thanks also to the whole team of Young Colombia that has made it possible for us to have these dialogue and that will be accompanying us and looking after these 3 hours flowing very smoothly in the Zoom virtual space. Well, so let's start. Let's start these 3 hours, which will be very dense, very revealing. It's a historic juncture with multiple crises and multiple levels of conflict, where the topic of care is a central paradigm. So being able to imagine, to turn around the relationships of power that oppress bodies and ecosystems and systems. So we want to talk about care from the different practical and perspective postures, and to be able to do so by focusing particularly on the topic of food care. Many times it is underrepresented in the public narrative when we talk about care. Therefore, we would like to understand better what is it that we're talking about when we talk food care. Because we have this paradigm of care, we want to put it at the core of the right to food, and we want to see why this link is fundamental in order to imagine the food to right as a concrete, doable right, material right. And why central? It's central to bet on a paradigm, putting it at the center of everything, life, exercising all the activities that will enable the realization of human rights. Time is a fundamental variable in the narrative of care, and it is just great that we can give some quality time today to tackling this topic and to exchange the different practices and experiences on the topic of care and how it is related to the right to food. Care as a task, as an individual and a collective practice, but also care as a collective experience of resistance. So care can give us a clear direction in relation to the food systems that we need in place today in order to have access to rights to food and to food sovereignty. And we will be on a journey through three dialogues that will look at food care from different perspectives in order to be able to reflect this systemic and domestic vision. We know that care is central for the feminist processes and for the different feminist approaches. So the first dialogue will be tackling the topic of food care, and its recognition is fundamental. First and foremost, we have to recognize the tasks related to care, which are invisible and exploited and discriminated, and of course are based on gender approaches and affect the bodies and the lives of those that provide it. The other dialogue will look at food care in the care systems, and we will also be going deeper in these concepts. And the third dialogue will be relating the right to care and its connection to the right of food and nutrition. We will also have the support of Ana Maria Suarez in the moderation, and for each dialogue, we will have some speakers that we will be introducing, and then we will open the floor to a general consultation at the end of each dialogue that will last about 50 minutes each dialogue. So we will try to honor it. So before we start with the dialogues, we will have an audiovisual presentation because we believe that it is very important to tackle the topic of care, aware of the fact that care is a task. It's collective practices that are practiced every day in the territories and in the different communities and in everyday lives. So with this audiovisual, we'll be introducing this topic by directly hearing the voices of three social leaders that work on food care to get to know their organizational processes of seed custody, conservation of traditional food, and the promotion of the care of the environment. Care, therefore, not only as a task to redistribute and recognize and represent, but also as a task of resistance to the violence of food systems. So let's have the audiovisual, and then I'll be presenting the first dialogue, and we'll be delving into that topic.
Hemos denominado cuidado alimentario a lo que se constituye como todo el trabajo y actividades que hacen las mujeres y cuerpos feminizados para la reproducción o sostenibilidad de la vida relacionada con el alimento.
Tengo una finca tradicional y pues aquí en este espacio estoy viviendo esa particularidad que tiene toda la vida. Es un proceso en el cual uno le dedica mucha atención, mucho cuidado. Es algo que nos lleva a pensar que es como si estuviéramos formando a un niño, porque al árbol hay que hablarle, hay que contemplarlo, hay que quitarle las ramitas que no van, hay que darle forma. Lo mismo que sucede con los seres humanos, así también sucede con la naturaleza en general.
Se cuenta aquí las actividades que permiten el cuidado de la biota, la biodiversidad, todas las tareas que desarrollan las mujeres para el suministro de alimentos, el cuidado de las semillas criollas o nativas, de la huerta, de los animales, de las plantas y de los bienes comunes que se requieren para que el alimento llegue a las mesas.
El quilombo de medicina ancestral Niara Charay fue una conquista de derecho de las comunidades negras, especialmente de las mujeres. Nosotros comenzamos en una apuesta intercultural de medicina ancestral del ser negro afrocolombiano. Inicialmente ellos tenían mucho miedo que nosotras las mujeres negras con nuestro saber ancestral fuéramos a hacer cosas que no estuvieran estipuladas en el sector salud, pero nosotros demostramos que nosotros amamos la vida, somos paridoras de vida y somos paridoras de procesos sociales y además parimos todo un contexto del cuidado.
Históricamente la mujer siempre ha sido la que ha conservado las variedades de semilla, la que se ha encargado del cuidado, tanto de la semilla vegetal como la semilla animal. Por eso se dan las crías de gallinas, se tienen diferentes especies de aves, incluso a la finca también llegan muchas aves, de acuerdo también a la variedad que se tenga de plantas sembradas. Nosotros las mujeres tenemos como el mango por la sartén para hacer cambios contundentes en la alimentación, porque cada vez estamos mirando que la alimentación es más deficiente, así nos llenemos, pero no estamos comiendo lo que debiera de ser, no estamos comiendo verdaderos alimentos y sobre todo es a los niños y a los jóvenes que impacta esto, ¿no? Entonces ellos ya quieren rechazar un huevo de campo, quieren rechazar las gallinas criollas, porque no es lo que están mostrando en los medios masivos. Y esto ha ido deteriorando la salud de muchos jóvenes y de muchas personas.
Para nosotras las mujeres negras afrocolombianas que constituimos los quilombos son espacios de resistencia y de participación social. No es solamente tratar salud, enfermedad, sino también prevención, pero también es todo un proceso organizativo. Un espacio de resistencia a los quilombos están en derecho diciendo que los quilombos tienen que ser integrales y como los quilombos son integrales, también nosotros defendemos el derecho a la alimentación como un derecho fundamental y el derecho al cuidado. Entonces, por eso hoy acá en la ciudad también estamos produciendo no la misma cantidad de pan coger, pero sí estamos produciendo alimentos para poder nosotros garantizar desde el cuidado un poco de alimentación autónoma para nuestras comunidades.
Bueno, este espacio nace justamente a través de la olla comunitaria, de la olla que sobre todo lideran las mujeres del barrio. Entonces el fogón siempre nos ha convocado y nos sigue convocando en este lugar como un espacio que posibilite otras maneras de alimentarnos, de sembrar, de otras redes de economía pues más locales y pues por supuesto desde la soberanía alimentaria. Entonces de ahí que este sea también un icono para ese componente del alimento.
Tratar de recuperar todas las semillas que están en peligro de extinción es volver a conseguir esas semillas, sembrarlas, cuidarlas y propagarlas. Y lo otro también es aprender a preparar esos alimentos con eso que estamos sembrando.
Entendemos que el trabajo del cuidado no remunerado relacionado con el proceso alimentario se refiere al trabajo que hacen las mujeres para la reproducción o sostenibilidad de la vida relacionada con el alimento, la garantía del derecho a la alimentación y la soberanía alimentaria.
Bien, con este video
Very
que
well.
ya
With
nos
this
enmarca,
video
introduce la próxima discusión, le doy
that
paso al
will lead
diálogo
us into the next
número 1
discussion,
sobre
let's
alimentación y
start the
reconocimiento del
dialogue
factor moderado para Ana María
on food
Suárez,
care and its
que es
recognition that will be
representante
moderated by Ana Maria Suarez, representative to the United Nations of
abogada,
FIAN
profesora de la
International.
Universidad de
She
Mannheim en
is
Alemania
a
y también
lawyer
cofundadora del
with
Coloquio
a PhD
Iberoamericano del
in
Instituto Max Planck
public
de Derecho Internacional
policies
Público y Constitucional
and
Comparado.
also
Ana
a degree from Mannheim University in Germany.
Creo que el micrófono se ha quedado apagado, ¿no?
I think that your mic is off. Thank you, Teresa. I would like to especially thank those of you that have organized this space to be able to learn more. And of course, special recognition to all the caring women that are with us. I won't dwell too much. I won't be too long. This first panel will be on the recognition of food care. We will be having three panelists of great experience and quality. I'll be naming them, and every time they speak, I'll be introducing them. We have Isa Alvarez, Director of Urgency and expert in agroecology and care. We'll also have Paola Romero, Coordinator of Projects and Gender for FIAN Colombia. And we will finish this dialogue between we move on to the questions with Maria Cecilia Bustos Moreshi. She's transgender coordinator or coordinator of gender at Fundex. To begin, I would like to introduce Isa. I would like to underline that she is a teacher and agroecologist. She is the president of the Urgency Network, an international organization of networks for sustained nutrition for the community. And for 20 years, she's been involved in networks that fight for food sovereignty with accompaniment and education and research, incorporating the feminist perspective in agroecologic transition. She also participated in the CIP. The CIP is the committee that works for food sovereignty, and it's part of the organizations in Rome and the mechanism of civil society and indigenous peoples, which is the organization, the group that represents rural movements of the Committee of World Food Security, which is the intergovernmental institution, which is the most important one in this area. She has been in working groups on women and diversity, and she coordinated the group for a peaceful process for food and nutrition systems. So we would like to hear from Isa. What implies the recognition of food care? Who of us are involved in this recognition? Who is related to the right to care? Please feel free to present anything you want. Thank you, Isa. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Espero que me
Thank you
escuchéis
very
bien.
much. I hope you
¿Escucháis?
can hear me well.
¿Escucha bien? Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes
Well,
para
good
mí.
morning, good afternoon in
Arrachaldeón,
my
como
case.
decimos aquí en mi tierra. Y bueno, primero un agradecimiento
First of all,
a
my
a
thanks
todo el equipo que ha hecho posible esto
to
y
all the
también
team that has
bueno,
made
a quien
this
se le haya
meeting
ocurrido
possible, and
la
thanks
invitación,
to
porque desde luego
whoever thought of this
poder compartir
invitation to me.
este
I'm more than
espacio en
happy
este
to be
lujo
able to share this space
de panel, ¿no? O sea, me
and
parece,
this
bueno,
panel.
una maravilla. Así que, bueno, muchísimas gracias
It's
para
wonderful,
comenzar, ¿no?
so thank you very
Era un
much to
reto
start.
ver cómo
So it was a
toda esa
challenge to
complejidad, ¿no? De
see
la que vamos a
how
ir
all that
hablando
complexity that we
en
will be
este
talking about
tiempo que vamos a
at
compartir,
this time
bueno,
that we will be
cómo
sharing.
quedarme con cosas
How can
para
I
no pasarme
stay
del
with
tiempo
certain
y
things so that
quedarme
I don't
estos 10
exceed the
minutitos,
time
¿no?
allowed and just
Entonces,
use
bueno,
10
voy a
minutes?
hablar principalmente
So
como
let me talk
de
mainly of
como de
three
tres aspectos
aspects,
principales, ¿no?
three main
Sobre
aspects,
todo para remarcar la
especially
centralidad de esto de lo que estamos
to
hablando. Es
underline
decir,
the
lo
importance of
apuntaba
what we're
Teresa antes,
discussing,
pero
care. Teresa was
parece que
mentioning this
siempre, bueno,
before, but
primero,
it seems that always,
desde la
or
mirada
first of
desde la
all,
que hablamos desde
from
una
the
mirada
stance that
de
we
otras economías, ¿no?
talk
Hablamos
about
de
from,
poner
when we
otras
talk
cosas
about
en el
other
centro, de
economies, we
hablar
talk
desde
about
una
putting
economía
other
feminista,
things at the
economía
center.
social,
We're talking about
economía
feminist
solidaria, con lo
economy,
cual
social
nuestros
economy,
ejes y
solidarity
nuestros
economy,
centros
and with that,
ya
our
se
axes
modifican,
and our
¿no? Respecto a
centers
la
are already
economía que
modified
nos
with
venden todos
relation
los
to the
días, ¿no? Y
economy
esto
that
nos
we are
requiere de
sold
otras
by
herramientas,
society
que es un
every
poco
day. And this calls
lo que me
for other
gustaba
tools.
compartir hoy, ¿no?
So this is what I would like to share
Y bueno, y
today.
dentro de todo esto, pues ver que esto no es algo
And as part of
transversal
this,
que vemos
this
hacer
isn't
cuando
cross-cutting
colocamos
that
en
we
los lugares,
decide and see how we're going to place. This is at the core. This is something that is vital. And I just wanted to begin, who will feed us, which is a question that arises all the time. There's a report that we've always read about their group, about this topic that is really interesting. But those of us who's been working for a long time in this, we can't separate this question, or if we want to answer the question who's going to feed us without asking who's going to care for us, because the two things go together. One won't happen with the other. Sometimes it's quite clear or more or less clear, but that food is care, and without access to food, we won't be cared for. And so there, it is important to make that difference, or which I learned in Colombia, this mantra, which is not the same to eat something but not to feed you or nourish you. We're not talking about feeding stomachs or filling stomachs, but we're talking about nourishing and protecting many things, not only to fill the stomachs without any criteria or criterion, or with the food nourishes us, cares for us, and without food or without nourishment, it's not easy. But without care, there is no food. That is not so clear. So to be able to be nourished, to have quality food, nutritional food, we need to have a basic basis of care, and this is at the core. Let us see if we can, because we're not talking about caring for people that produce or that transform or that eat those food. We're talking about from a comprehensive perspective, from the territory. We're talking about the agroecological perspective, not only from the territory when we talk about bodies, when we talk about seeds, we can talk about water. So these are vital goods that we need to have food, but it's also vital to care for the immaterial territories, the knowledge, the relationships, the links. When we talk about caring for the territory as basis, we're talking about all this, and it's not something that we decide to do or opt to do. This is at the core. Otherwise, we won't be able to nourish ourselves, and we need to move towards that agroecological movement that we would like to protect, because and we would like to move forward in terms of food sovereignty. Now, if you would go to the next slide, please.
Sí, vale, gracias. Bueno, en todo esto es fundamental
as you can see here, it is vital to see how we care those who care for others, those people. We looked at that video of this woman that from different links of the food chain, they care, they're there. Well, we need to ask ourselves when we talk about care, how we care those caregivers, those who care for others, all those people who are within that framework. And I don't have really the time to talk about it. We could make reference to when we talk of feminist agriculture or economy, we talk about the visible and invisible parts of economy. We've also worked on the verde of the agroecological system, how we see the distribution, how we see part of the production and part of consumption. But what is invisible is really the production, the small production linked to nature, linked to care, that consumption, which is linked to those communities, is also invisible, and especially everything that happens within the homes, whereas really we're historically we have made them invisible, everything that we're talking about care. So when we see the different links so that our food system, our agroecological systems can be sustained, I hope you can see it, but I don't have the screen in front of me. But the basis for that food to be able to common life. They have to have healthy territories. And when we talk about healthy, we talk about you can breathe, that they're not contaminated, they're free from violence. Also, we're not only talking about that earth analysis or soil analysis are good, but these should be peaceful. And I can't, well, you know what I mean. Without a territory, then it's very difficult for us to do something. The territory is the basis. After that, when you have to care, all the people, all the ecosystems that inhabit that territory need to be cared for. And as of that care and being able to be sustained, when we can build the communities, we can sustain a collective construction and participation. We have to build in a collective manner. And then from those three pillars, we can maybe generate production chains, production transformation chains, distribution spaces, and shared consumption spaces. From consumption communities to those pods that we talked about in the video, those stoves. Those are collective spaces that really defend the model that we're talking about today. And they might take us, that they're the only ones that can take us to adequate food and adequate nutrition. Then we have other elements that are also important. But if we have all the others, this should not be vital. And then we would have public subsidies and global market. Today, what happens today? The lower part, the territories, the care, and all that collective area and participative area is not recognized. What is visible? Public subsidies and global market, without which apparently we would not be able to survive. But the truth is, we cannot survive without all the other bit, the third three lines. So this will be developed throughout the panels. So let us move to the next slide, please. And so if we analyze, all this does not happen in a space where we're going to talk about, let's care for ourselves, have a territory, let's have a collective spaces, but we live within a social, economic, and political framework. And it's determined by public policies and what is decided to be prioritized in those public policies. So today, in general, we talk about public policies that are hand in hand with a capitalist framework, patriarchal framework, which makes it visible, everything that reinforces that framework. And that framework, which is really thick, as you can see, is very powerful. And we are trying to fight against this framework, how to open our space and how can we make progress to transform this. So this is the basis of the system in which we work, and the challenge and the need to recognize. We need to make all those parts visible and put them at the core. When we talk about all the time from the feminist perspective to put life at the center, this is putting life at the center also, and understanding that we cannot find food if we don't have that care basis within the territory, looking at the territory from that perspective, which is a comprehensive look at the entire system. So this is really what I wanted to advocate for. And it's not only about telling us or about advocate or dialogue, because it is, of course, this is important. We need to dialogue. Many of us who are here, we've been reflecting together, building together, fighting together. And in some places, we want to be heard, we want to be listened to, we want people to know that we exist and that we need to be recognized, that we need to be visible. But we also need new tools to be able to measure. How do we know whether this new model is existing? How do we measure, not from a quantitative perspective, but, for example, if I want to do the next slide, I'm almost finished.
No sé quién está
Please,
pasando.
could you give me the next slide? Okay.
Entonces, en estas nuevas herramientas que
So with these new
no
tools in
solamente
place that
otras
we
formas
need,
de
or
mirar, sino
well,
incluso también el
it's not all the ways of looking, but
nosotras desde
the
hace
way we
cuatro
use
décadas,
language.
hablo de mí con
And
la
when
gente,
we
con
talk
amigos,
about
y
we,
también todas
I
las
talk
que
about
estamos haciendo
myself and many of
nuevos
us who
marcos,
are
¿no?
here,
Y
who are
para
trying
mí,
to
sobre
build
todo,
new frameworks. And
cuando
for me,
hablamos
it
de
is
todas las
important when we
iniciativas
talk about all the initiatives that sustain food and food care.
somos viables o no somos
We need to be feasible. We need, and I'm fed up thinking about whether we're feasible. Of course, we're feasible, but are we livable? Our initiatives, our spaces, our places, are they livable? Because sometimes if it's feasible, yes, could lead us to looking at when we try to strike a balance between revenues or income and expenses, it could lead to a negative or positive. But so many times we see initiatives that are feasible in terms of expenses, but they're not livable because people don't rest, because there isn't a dignified life. Because the question we should be asking, when life is at the core, whose life is at the core? So how do we make these spaces livable? So we need to address these inequalities. How do we analyze the whole perspective? And feasibility is one leg you see on the right, but it has to be livable and it has to be visible. Otherwise, we will never come out of this invisible air spectrum in which we find ourselves. We always talk about another world that is possible, but the other world already exists. So we are doing many, many things that sustain different models. And if we just move to the next, the last slide, at the end is really to defend the models and public support those subsidies that should not be vital, but those public subsidies really make things feasible of those who sustain food, not all of those who produce just anything, and to make it livable and to ensure dignified life and free from violence to all of us. So this is really the framework with which we're working and with other tools. And we're not talking about only accountability from accounting from a perspective of money, but how we distribute it, where we are and where are we made disappear, because sometimes they don't want to make us visible. And this is the closing.
Nada, ya está. Termino. Okay. Solo para decir que no
just to tell you that the starting point of all of us is not the same. So we haven't have one recipe for all. And these new views and these new measures, we need to do it from a comprehensive perspective, including everything. All intersectional. I know there's so many things will reinforce everything that we've just been doing. Thank you very much. Thank you. We know that you could give us a very rich lesson, but unfortunately we need to have to leave time for everyone. I would like to highlight two elements that I thought were really interesting. The first one is without food, there's no care, and without care, there's no food. And unfortunately, institutions that manage care, at least here in Geneva, it hasn't been acknowledged or recognized that food. So this idea is very important. And also the importance of making visible care, which is invisible, and it's really the one that sustains society. Without the work of all these women and the effort of the communities, this system would not work. And this is why we need not only to respect their agency as such, but to ensure that all public policies that are feminist, that are intersectional, they respect them, they care for them, and they enable them to participate. So I would like to add something else, but I will now give the floor to Paula Romero, who is Gender Project Coordinator here in Colombia. She is an advocate for human rights for many,
Paola
many
hace
years.
parte del grupo de
Paola
trabajo de
is
feminismos
part
del
of
mecanismo de
the
la sociedad civil para
feminist
las
group for
relaciones
civil
con el Comité de
society
Seguridad Alimentaria Mundial de
and
Naciones Unidas
the food committee of
y
the
la
United
Alianza
Nations
Continental por
and
la
the
Soberanía
Continental
Alimentaria
Alliance
y del
for Food
Movimiento
Sovereignty
Social de Mujeres La Sureña,
and
es decir,
acknowledgement of
desde La
women.
Sureña hasta
So
Roma,
from
espacio
Sureña to
muy amplio,
Rome,
coordina el área de género
this is a broad
y derechos
space. She
humanos
manages
de las
human
mujeres en
rights
FIAN
and gender
y también
of
es
women in
investigadora,
FIAN.
Paola,
She's
además
also a
de
research.
activista.
In
Ella ha hecho
addition to
sus
being an activist,
investigaciones en torno a la
she
defensa del
carries
derecho a
out
la
research
alimentación y la
on
soberanía
defending the
alimentaria
right to
desde un enfoque
food
feminista
sovereignty from
y
a
se ha
feminist
destacado por la
perspective.
defensa en el ámbito
And we can
internacional de los
highlight
derechos
her
de las mujeres
advocacy
rurales,
on the rights
además
of
de
rural women,
desarrollar
in
procesos de
addition to
acompañamiento a
developing
comunidades de base
accompaniment
para la
processes to
justiciabilidad de su
grassroots
derecho a la
communities.
alimentación y la
So,
nutrición adecuada.
fighting for the right to
Igual que
food
Isa,
and
una
adequate
mujer con una
nutrition, just
historia
like
de vida
Isa,
increíble, una
she has
energía
a
que nos
wonderful
va
life
también a
history.
enseñar muchas
Her
cosas.
energy,
Paola,
it's also
dejo en tus
amazing. So,
manos
Paola,
presentarnos
the
lo que
floor is
consideres
yours.
que será nuestro día.
Please give us your presentation, and I'm sure it will enrich what we're doing here today. So thank you, Ana, Isa, and Tere, and all the people that have been part of this work group to make this the first dialogue a reality. I would also like to thank FIAN Colombia, the entire team who's behind that, who cares for us right now. I wanted to begin. There's so much to say. Isa already reinforced some areas that it helps me to move forward in the content. And we've worked together, and you can see that all these reflections that we've worked on. So first and foremost, I would like to have a reflection. We think that without the right to care, there is no food process. So that's really the core reflection where Anna mentioned, and Isa talked about the importance of including in the care agenda the right to food, but also to include that right to care in the food agenda. So this is a core idea, a central idea, and to that end, I would like to talk about two moments of my presentation. What do we understand by food care from a political dimension and trying to broaden that food process? And the second question is from a reivindicative perspective of food care. So with this first idea, when we talk about food care towards its political dimension, so to start, let us locate ourselves, or let us think about what we understand by the current food system, which is a corporate diet. It's unequal and it doesn't distribute care. This is the iceberg that Isa was talking about. We've been working with this iceberg. This is a pedagogy that is feminist, which is in like the supply chain around food. So one visible way of looking at it, of understanding, we have the iceberg, and you can see on the top of the iceberg what is really produced as the value around the corporate diet, a lot of UPPs, ultra-processed foods, monocrops, large surfaces, and other elements of the supply chain that really we lose the food matrix and affects biodiversity. But in addition to that value chain, most of the women are the ones that work with precarious work and are exploited. Now, in the lower part of the iceberg, we find that is invisible, which is not recognized or hardly valued. like the ethnical, social community and peasant community, the caring of women in the production, transformation of food that really produces a great value in terms of usage for the society at large and future generations. So that FAO says that most most of the population really have real food, and most the women are the ones that feed the world. These are Black women, peasant women, indigenous women, poor women that have a huge gap in terms of their right to land, the right to education, the right to health, the right to work, the right to be at peace. And then, of course, the right to food is an expression of the sexist and patriarchal regime that we have of which affects the food system. An example is the situation of insecurity in terms of food. You can see on the right-hand side, at global level, women have no food security. They exceeded men's by 2.4% in 2002, while in Latin America and the Caribbean, this difference was 9.2 percentage points. According to FAO, 37% of this gap is explained by the disparity in education and participation. I think it's also explained because it doesn't have we don't have an intersectional perspective. So to be able to look at this perspective of care within all these inequalities, we may begin to identify how we can quantify care with respect to or vis-a-vis food. And here I would like to talk about what Isa already touched on, but with the economy of care, we have the satellite account in the national account system for 2021 domestic work and non-remunerated work or not unpaid work, which is 21.7 of the total economy of Colombia. This happens also in other countries around the world. So with the activities that measure this, the provision of foods, which is the main activity, which is unpaid work, compared with other activities that are measured within this work, such as procurement, maintenance, clothing. This is a relevant data, and women really dedicate a lot of time to this activity vis-a-vis men. So if we were to measure this comprehensively in the care system, these percentages and gaps would be even greater. Maybe some things are not quantifiable, and they are and we want this to go through make them mercantile. So within these activities, we have a legacy that women have left. They have seed guardians that protect biodiversity and life. The recipe is that knowledge, that cultural knowledge, what inspires the smell, the warmth, the scent, the work of those who defend nature. This is something that can't be quantified. Production of life in the food that we take, the food that nourishes us, is what makes us human, that how fragile this is co-creation. We need to, that's what we're talking about, the power of woman, the agency of woman, and the care of woman who care for us with respect to food.
Teniendo estos elementos
So having this in mind, we can maybe broaden and empower the process of food and the right to care. So we've been researching about all those activities that we do with respect to care in the food process, and the findings find that there is an interdependence of these two rights. Here are some elements: caring, or the seed guardians of vegetable gardens, orchards, caring for the forest, the water. They're important for the struggle to resist colonization of food, and also having just one diet, but like Teresa mentioned at the beginning, to resist the violence of a food system that is patriarchal in nature. Also, caring the way we exchange customary exchange manners that defy mercantile logics. And that's what Isa was talking about, of that which is sustainable, livable. Cuidar, or caring, that exchange of food by other food, that other economic logics, and also the importance of highlighting the agency of women and those who care, or those caregivers. And we need to care for the time of those women, especially those who dedicate their life for food care. This is vital for quality of life and should be considered as a right to have the right to rest and to be cared for. Now, to complete, or to finish this, so we find that from a food care perspective, there's some key elements that we need to take into account: redistribution, recognition, reduction, and representation. This is really, and I would add to this 4 R's: resistance, like Teresa said. These are vital pillars to have this vindicative aspect for food care. And this is a call to action. So from the recognition perspective, we need to recognize those who care around food. We need to recognize their knowledge, their cultural knowledge, everything that is woven around the stove or a community pot. And through generations, that recognition through generation, which makes it livable or unfeasible. With respect to the topic of redistribution, it could be paid, it could be free from oppression and inequalities, and it has to be dignified, that generates parity, that we can have public policy focused with care at the core, denaturalizing that relationship of just woman, care, and food, acknowledging also specific situations such as homes where women are the heads of households. With respect to reduction, it's reducing the time and the difficulties related to food care, as it's highly costly in terms of physical and mental effort, especially for women. This also refers to infrastructure, having access to drinking water. Ana, tell me if I'm almost finished, but tell me. I'm just
Sí,
looking
sí, yo
here at the
sé, está muy
presentation.
rica. Llevas 12
Yeah,
minutos, Pau. Así que
you have to, so I need to wrap up. Okay. So the element of reduction relates to infrastructure, access to drinking water, to power, to gas, and to roads, to adequate roads, so that they can move around, and also state protection. And lastly, representation, we talk about power and the agency of women. So just to wrap up and to complete, with respect, unpaid work that women do in the food process, this is vital, and we need to acknowledge we can have a limited knowledge of what it means.
And with that, I would like to finish with the words from Marta Renteria at the Inter-American Court in March, who said, "Women have given birth to the earth and to our territories, and we have taken care of it to keep food on our tables and the others' tables, including those hearing us here." So thank you, Ana, and this is it for me. Well, thank you very much. I will just say 4 words because we are lagging a little bit behind. Recognition, redistribution, reduction, remuneration. And then you can ask more questions. I think that everything was very clear. I would like to emphasize the topic of correcting the precarization of the work and to fighting patriarch societies that affect caregivers from their homes and all the way to the global and international policies. So after these comments, I would like to give the floor now to Maria Cecilia Bustos Moreshi. She is the gender coordinator at Fundep. She has a degree in history, specialized in political science of care. She has a degree in the management and proposal of distance education and a master's degree in anthropology. And she has done courses on integral sexual education and feminist economy. Maria Cecilia has participated in research teams on working networks on recent Argentinian history, on gender and labor, as well as on care and old age, human rights and businesses at University Siglo XXI. And today she is a teacher in the middle and higher level. Maria Cecilia, you have the floor. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to hear all of you. Let me take this opportunity and go back to everything that you said, as well as to what Paula said, in order to summarize a little bit more my presentation. As an Argentinian woman, I'll be talking about this feeling of upset, accompanied by sadness, but always going back to what you were mentioning, the need to generate support networks, support in care, and struggle and fight for resistance. So in my voice shows it. It's because I have these feeling in me. I understand that we all start from the same basis in relation to the importance of recognizing the right to care as a human right from a feminist, intersectional, intercultural perspective, giving, of course, value to the work that sustains life and the functioning of this society, in spite of the fact that we know that beyond all the feminist actions, there's still a sexual division in labor, which is still an impediment for accessing the right to care and the guarantee of human rights in general. I won't dwell on the right to care because I understand that Laura Pautasi will be talking about that, but talking also about the importance of the states in that progress is made and that recognition is given to this positive obligation as a main guarantor and responsible for promoting a social organization that will put at its core the care and that will diminish the pressure that exists on families and women and will guarantee universal access to the care services of good quality with no discrimination and in favor to substantial equity or sustainable equity. I think it's important to expand the notion of care so that it includes non-human life. We're always talking about the sustainability of human life, but we have to refer to non-human life. So let me bring my reflections around the relationship between gender, cares, and the environment, because I think it's important to reflect about these relationships between justice in gender, social justice, and environmental justice, and to think of these strategic alliances of a fight in order to give relevance to this need of recognition to the right to care, thinking of sustainability of human life and also of non-human life. So going back to what Isa said, to this idea of contributions from the other economies, mainly the contributions of the ecofeminism, we know that nothing can work without care. No one, nothing, which means that we are interdependent, but also we are eco-dependent. And this becomes relevant when we understand that the relations among human beings or between human beings and nature is not gender neutral. Of course, there are social constructs that are cut across heterosexism and patriarch concepts. So what's interesting about ecofeminism is to focus on these interrelationships, putting them in frameworks of social, cultural, and historic processes. And it also aligns them with contributions from other feminisms like social movements, peasant movements, African descendant, indigenous movements. And it incorporates this intersectional, intercultural view. And it also gives visibility to alternatives to this development that we understand, this development that is offered as the only one possible brought by the present dominant system. But there are alternatives. And of course, it exposes a criticism to these colonialist, patriarchal, androcentric, anthropocentric system and the implications that it has in our lives and in our bodies and territories. But as we also says, it vindicates the strategies of fight, the protagonic role that we women have, particularly women as producers and reproducers, the importance of the work, of care for life sustainability, the defense and the management of the common goods, as is water, biodiversity, the seeds, care not only of families, but of communities. Women are the caregivers of what is common and what is community. And of course, this alignment between the personal level and the political level, which of course has brought this drive that indigenous and racialized and peasant women have that create conditions for their participation and political participation in their communities and which is aligned for their fight for the rights. Let me bring up here the importance of talking about advocates and leaders in the environment as caregivers of life. Because, of course, women and we depend more than all on the access to these common goods, the use of land for subsistence agriculture, and the knowledge of other forms that are more sustainable for production and access to water to supply their households, their communities, and other systems of food production. These are the basis of women's work due to the sexual division of labor. That's why the current and the deepening on the privatization of these common goods has a higher impact on us women. That's why it is key here to start from the basis that women's labor, indigenous people's labor, and communities' labor done in the protection and conservation of the territories, these communities must be considered as a work of care and that become very important given the recent contamination and damage from neo-extractivist projects with big risks for their own well-being. Many of these people, or us, we are facing serious threats to our lives in a context in which states are not protecting the advocates and defendants of human rights, let alone being remunerated or paid for these work. So in a context of a lot of reinforcement, these neoliberal and conservative governments strengthen also in this context of civilizatory context, which is a multidimensional crisis, beyond the fact that these governments are part of what is causing all this and that are not even camouflaging their narrative on impact decisions, green economies, they don't even camouflage that. The solutions that they are trying to give are given unimposed by these people that are responsible for these crises, which go in the opposite direction. In other words, pointing to deepening through neo-extractivist, neo-colonialist projects that, as I said, imply the privatization of these common goods and of the vital processes in general, which is added to the definancialization financing and dismantling of public utilities that overcharge, of course, women's work, reinforcing oppression towards them in this current system. So, which are these interrelationships between gender and the environment, which I've been mentioning already? Well, women are the ones that have been playing the most important role in the conservation and the fight for the defense of the ecosystems, being the main managers and invisible caregivers of the environment every day, as well as caregivers of their communities from a perspective of life sustainability. This is why these ecosystems get damaged and the common goods are scarce. So women are the ones that face the biggest burden in care by having to compensate these laws and the reduced supply of ecosystemic services. And women are the ones that face the biggest impacts from environmental degradation, climate change, being the situation a reflection and also a factor that deepens the conditions of inequality and marginalization and violence that impedes the full enjoyment of our rights. So elements like lack of access to land, to common goods, and the vulnerability vis-a-vis climate change, and the gaps that exist in these decision-making processes in the environment, all of them deepen these inequalities and deepen precisely the transition towards other alternative models. And at this point, I think it's necessary to analyze aspects such as what is behind this development, the structure of the care that lies behind the structure, the overburden on the use and the overburden of the care of women in an unpaid manner. In this context of mining extractivist projects, women are the ones that produce and reproduce the workforce that is geared to addressing these extractivist projects, and they're the ones that have to face the impacts. And here I'm trying to summarize because I have this message that I only have 1 minute left. Well, the use of pesticides, for instance, which added to the climate crisis, has had a fundamental and very serious effect in the life of women, mainly because they are the ones that spend the highest amount of time in the communities and the ones that need the most time to devote to the care of their children and their people and their own health, sexual, reproductive, and non-reproductive health. Because, of course, agrotoxic substances affect pregnancies. So these increases the load of care. And these women are the ones that are responsible for supplying care and food and water precisely when these mining projects are taking these common elements away from them, and they affect, of course, food security and food sovereignty. So let me go back to some final thoughts. Just 2 minutes I will take for this. I think that going back to the comments that we heard from Paula, it's important to recognize the work of care to reduce the workload, redistribute it, to guarantee significant representation, particularly for these leaders and advocates in the environment. But I think that it's also important to reformulate the economy, an economy of care whose norms and public policies put at the center the sustainability of human and non-human life and consider care necessary for social reproduction and the reproduction of life. And of course, here, I think it's important to adopt an interpretation of care as an autonomous right, as a need, as work that allows to build a new social pact center on the care for the sustainability of life, which means committing to alternative modes of development based on solidarity, cooperation, mutual support, participatory economies, that is to say, the other economies, basically, that will point to mutual well-being of people and nature, learning, of course, of the journeys of the communities and social movements and feminist organizations, indigenous women and workers in popular care, peasant communities, which are the ones that really face these economies that steal from us, and the progress of the conservative right wing that point to extractivist models and that imply pillage not only of our bodies but also of our territories. So we can no longer be a factor of adjustment. It's important to start committing to alternative models that will actually be sustainable. To think that what is unsustainable is the current models that are becoming deeper and that go in the opposite direction of what is sought or what we're seeking to establish. So we have so much to talk about, but let's wait until the questions.
Bueno, muchas
Thank you.
gracias, María Cecilia, por
Thank you,
seguir
Maria
contribuyendo al
Cecilia,
tema del
for
cuidado
also
planetario,
referring
que
to
es
this whole topic
transversal a
of
todos
planetary
los
care
sistemas
that cuts
alimentarios,
across food
especialmente
systems,
donde las
especially
campesinas, todas las comunidades
where
rurales y indígenas
peasants
juegan un
and the
rol
rural and indigenous
importantísimo.
communities play a very
Tenemos
important
aquí
role. So we
tres
have
preguntas,
here three
así que antes de
questions.
las palabras de cierre voy a
So
leerlas y le
before
daré a
I
cada
go
una
for the
un minuto.
closing
Les pido, por
words,
favor,
I will give
que no se
each
extiendan
one a
mucho
minute.
porque o
Please
si
don't
no,
exceed the
las
minute
personas que están al final
because
del evento no van a
those
tener
that are at
tiempo
the end of
y
the
ellas no van a
event
poder
will not
pedir
have
más
time
minutos.
and
Entonces,
they won't be
con
able to ask for
respeto,
any more
por
time.
favor.
So out of
Las
respect,
preguntas
please.
son,
So the
lo que se
questions
quiere
are,
entonces es que el
so what we
trabajo de cuidado
want
alimentario
is
sea
for the
remunerado.
food care
Primera
work
pregunta.
to be a paid
Segunda
work. That's
pregunta,
one
¿qué
question.
implica
Second question,
cuando se dice
what
reconocer el
is
concepto de
implied when we say to
viabilidad
recognize the concept of
que habla Isa
feasibility
o de
that Isa
sostenibilidad de
mentioned,
la vida?
or the
¿Qué
concept of
significa eso?
sustainability of life? What does
Y
that
la
mean?
última
And
pregunta,
the last question,
¿cómo actuar
how to
o cómo han
act
actuado las mujeres
or
en la
how have
resistencia
women
a las propuestas de
acted
economía
in the
verde como bonos
resistance
de
to the
carbono o
green
ley
economy
azul que
proposals
quieren
as is carbon
financiarizar
bonds
las
and
acciones
blue
de cuidado de las
economy that
comunidades
wants
y en
to
particular de las
uh,
mujeres?
look
Excelentes
at the
preguntas.
care actions
Comencemos
of women.
entonces en
Okay,
el mismo
excellent
orden.
questions.
Isa
Let's
tiene
start in the
un
same
minuto.
order. Isa, you have 1 minute.
Sí, bueno, a ver, lo voy a intentar.
Okay, I'll do my
Bueno, por
best.
empezar por alguna parte, luego las compas que
To start
contesten
somewhere,
como ellas vean. Bueno, yo creo que lo que estamos hablando aquí,
I
creo que
think that what we're talking about
coincidimos en esto,
here, we pretty
es
much agree on
hacer
that.
visible lo
We
que
have to give
realmente sostiene
visibility to
el
what
sistema
really
alimentario, que
sustains
ahora
the
mismo
food
está
system,
absolutamente
which
invisibilizado
at this point is
y no solo
completely
invisibilizado,
invisible. And
incluso
not only
despreciado, ¿no?
invisible,
O sea, es
it's
como esas
not
cosas
appreciated.
que
It's
suceden
like one
porque
of
alguien
those
las
things
hace
that happen just because
y
someone
como no están
does
remuneradas,
them,
pues no
and
tienen valor.
because they're
Nosotros les
unpaid,
damos
they have no
valor aunque no
value.
estén
We
remuneradas.
give them
Aquí no
value
estamos
even
hablando
though
de
they're
ponerle
not
un precio a
remunerated.
todo.
We're not
Estamos
talking
hablando
about putting a
primero
price
de
on
darle valor.
everything.
Y darle
We're
valor es una cosa.
talking about giving it value, and
Ponerle
giving it
precio,
value is
pues a lo
one
mejor en
thing.
algún
Putting a
caso
price on that,
puede ser, no lo
well,
sé, pero para mí
perhaps
eso es
in
otro
certain
debate.
case,
Ahora
well, for
mismo,
me, that's a
de lo que
different
yo estoy
debate.
hablando es
I don't
de
know. What I'm talking about here
se dé valor
is
y
that
se ponga en el
value
centro y
is
sin todo
given
eso,
and
lo
that it
demás no
is
puede
put at the
suceder.
center, because
O sea,
without
porque
that,
es
all the
como
other
lo
things
básico
cannot
para
happen.
poder
That's the
seguir
fundamental
avanzando.
thing in
No
order to continue
solamente que
moving
sea
forward
reconocido,
and advancing.
porque no
And
nos
not
vale
only
solo,
having it
ay, qué bien,
recognized,
cuánto
because
trabajo
what's the point in
hacéis,
saying, oh,
sobre
that's
todo
so
las
nice, you
mujeres,
work
sino que
so
sea
much,
redistribuido.
especially you
O sea,
women.
porque
No,
claro,
it has to
si
be
seguimos cargando
redistributed
en los hombros
because if we
de las de siempre y no
continue
redistribuimos nada,
working
pues
just
la
the same
desigualdad
and we don't
no va a
redistribute
cambiar, ¿no?
anything,
Y yo
inequality
por
will
ahí
not
voy a dejar mi
change.
minuto.
Okay, that's my minute.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Muchas
Vale.
gracias.
Voy a,
Y mi computador se desconectó, pero ya estoy de
My
vuelta.
computer got disconnected, but I'm back. Paola?
vale, Ana.
Right,
Bueno,
Anna. Well,
no, de acuerdo con Isa, yo creo
yes,
que
I agree
es
with
más
Isa.
allá. No, no queremos
I
solo
think
que
that
sea
things go
remunerado,
beyond that
que sea
point. We are not just
reconocido,
talking about paid
redistribuido,
work,
reducido y
recognized,
que también sea
redistributed,
parte
and
de un
reduced,
ejercicio de
and
poder
that
y
it
de
is also part and
resistencia
an exercise of
y
power and
frente a
resistance
lo
vis-a-vis
que es la viabilidad, la viabilidad y la
lifeability,
sostenibilidad
feasibility,
alrededor
sustainability
también de lo
around
que tiene que ver con el
everything
tema
that
de
has to
lo que
do
decía Cecilia,
with what
lo
Cecilia was
insostenible,
saying,
¿sí?
what
Es
is
una respuesta
unsustainable.
a lo que es
It's an answer
insostenible, que es
to
el
what is
actual
unsustainable,
régimen
which is the
alimentario
current
corporativo,
corporate food regime,
extractivista, y
extractivist.
esta es la apuesta, ¿no?
And this is the
Estos modelos sí son
commitment.
viables,
These models
y
are
da, y
viable.
como decía Sisa,
What was
bueno,
the term, Isa,
es
that
muy
you were using?
interesante la propuesta que hace Sisa sobre
Isa,
eso
your
que
proposal is very
realmente es
interesting
posible, ¿no?
on what is really
Así que
possible.
yo dejaría hasta aquí.
So I will leave it at that.
Gracias, Paola. María Cecilia.
Thank you, Paola. Maria Cecilia, go ahead.
Bueno,
bueno, ¿qué más sumarle a lo que dijeron las
I would
compañeras
like
que
to
estaba
add
muy
to
bueno?
what
Creo que
my colleague said, which is very good. I like that. I think that in order to advance this recognition, which I share with Isa, we're not necessarily talking about remuneration, but recognition and redistribution. I think that here there's a key factor, which is, well, it implies advance in recognition, which implies conceptualizing the concept of care from the perspective of sustainability of human life and non-human life, and to eliminate the stereotype gender-related roles that undervalue it. So this redistribution starts with this reconceptualization, which is radical. But going back to this idea of lifeability, I think that, yes, if we really want to transition to a more fair society, we have to leave behind this logic of thinking about nature as something that is a stranger, as an object, something stranger to mankind, as a quote unquote, an endless resource. But we also have to think in the same way regarding the care that women provide. It cannot be just a variable of adjustment in crisis where these projects, these extractivist projects, deepen it and modify our interrelationship with the rest of the people. So in this context of solutions that ends up coming from the same system of economies of the death, that's where we have to think of an alternative. And the backbone here lies on food sovereignty, where all these aspects become aligned, the sustainability of life. So I think that it's not just a matter of adding rights for women, for instance, and adding them to the public spheres, etc. It's not just that. It's to go back to this reconceptualization of care, that it would recover the experiences and this idea of food care and environment care, which go hand in hand as a fundamental aspect for the sustainability of life. That's why I think it is fundamental to advance towards an interpretation of the right to care so that it is interpreted from the perspective of sustainability of life that cuts across everything. It's radical and
Muchas
revolutionary.
gracias,
And
María
with that, I've
Cecilia.
used up my
Es
minute.
horrible este rol
Thank you, Maria Cecilia. This role is
darle
terrible.
tiempo.
I don't
Es
like
importante.
keeping the time, but it's
Con esto
important.
cerramos
So with
entonces
this, we close
nuestro primer
our
panel.
first
Nos
panel.
queda claro que el tema del
So it
cuidado es
is
un tema de
clear that
poder,
this
de
topic of care
reivindicación,
is a
de
topic of power, of
cambiar el patriarcado, de
vindication, of
defender el
changing
planeta,
patriarchal
que se
systems,
refiere
of
a todo el
defending the
ciclo de
planet,
vida, a
and that it
muchos
refers to the
elementos de los
whole life
sistemas
cycle and to
alimentarios
many
que no
elements
solo
in the
son
food system that
producir,
are not only
intercambiar
about producing and
y,
exchanging
digamos,
and,
consumir, sino
let's
que
say,
tienen elementos
consuming, but that
inmateriales,
also have
culturales, sociales y
immaterial, cultural,
ambientales
social, and
que deben
environmental
estar
elements
basados
that
desde
must
una
be
visión de género
crossed
y de
crossed by a
interseccionalidad.
vision of gender and
Es decir, no solo una
intersectionality.
cuestión de
In other words,
subsidios, es
it's not
mucho más, es
just about
holístico,
subsidies,
por
it's
eso se
much
habla
more.
de
It's a holistic
sistemas de
view.
cuidados,
That's
que
why
es
we
el
talk about
próximo panel.
care systems,
Así
which
que
is
con esta
precisely the
palabra
next
clave
dialogue or
le
panel.
devuelvo a
So, with this
Teresa
keyword,
Maizano, nuestra
I
moderadora,
will return the floor to our
entonces, muchas
moderator,
gracias
Teresa
a
Maizano.
las cuatro, a las
Thank
tres,
you.
excelentes presentaciones.
And for the three of you, congratulations, excellent presentations. Thank you, Ana Maria. And my thanks to the panelists that were excellent. Also, because vis-a-vis what we just heard and what we're doing also, this is a way of advocating this pillage that you were referring to of the bodies, the territories, our words and our narratives. So through these dialogues, we are defending this word and we're anchoring it substantially to our understanding, our practices, and our relationships. So now we will move now to dialogue number 2 that I will be moderating, lagging a little bit behind in time. Well, I will be presenting them. We're coming into the second dialogue that will look at food care in the systems of care. And we will be doing that with excellent panelists. The first one being Lorenza Bordamalo Guerrero from the Head of Care Ministry, and she is a social worker and specialist in, the analysis of public policies at Columbia National University, and also Marta Alfonso Jurado. She's the Department of Tolima representative to the House of Representatives in Colombia. She's a representative of the Collective of Women in Colombia and a member of the Women's Department Network, and she's part of the Colombian Women's Network working every day on the issues of human rights, full citizenship, and women's rights. So it is my honor to be moderating this panel with the three of you. From this moment, from this conceptual framework, we will start putting the different pieces of a mosaic of a key concept, which is the concept of care. So now we'll be moving to an approach in the case of Colombia to look at two big topics. So I will ask Lorenza and, and Marta to answer a first round of questions and then a second round of questions. So the time that you have available, please share it in this first round, which is about 5 minutes, 6 minutes tops, so that we can get back some of the time that we've lost. And the first question that I would like to ask is to please tell us about what a care system is. Talking about food care, what is a system of care and why is it important? Why is it important to talk about a care system? I will ask Lorenza first if she can start with this first round, and you'll have about 5 minutes. I'll be sending you a message when you only have 1 minute left. Thank you, Lorenza, and you're welcome. Thank you very much. Let me know that you're hearing me well. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. So thank you very much for this invitation. Actually, I have learned a lot. This first panel has shed a lot of light in order to advance the design of our care system in Colombia. Now, in order to answer to your specific question, a care system or a system of care articulates different things, public policies, programs, projects, services. It aligns all of them. It aligns different types of institutional answers in order to reach out to the demands of care from society and to look for ways to mitigate the inequalities that exist in the provision of care. So this is a very general answer, but I think it's key to share with you which is our vision and what is the goal or objective of our care system that we are at present designing in Colombia, which is an initiative coming from the current administration, which is to develop a society of care where the state will be a guarantor to the right of receiving care. The positioning or the position of our country is that the care system must be at the center of the guarantee of the right to receive care, to the right to give care under dignified conditions. And we have a whole new dimension that goes along the line of what Paola was mentioning before, as well as Maria Cecilia, which is to recognize the dimension of the care of what is non-human. In this sense, we would like to recognize, protect, and strengthen the community forms of care in order to position care as the center of life's sustenance, which is part of our fundamental policy in the framework of our system of care. In this sense, in Colombia, we're making the effort to align an institutional response from 34 entities, 20 administrative sectors at a national level, in order to put life at the center, which is a phrase that was so resonant and so concise from the previous panel that I would like to rescue, to use for our system of care. And that's what I would say. Thank you, Lorenza, for your ability to give us a very clear and precise framework in such a short time. Now, I would ask Marta if she could tackle this topic from a legal point of view and why is so important to look at the systems of care at the level of the government and public policies.
Buenas tardes. Qué pena
Good
con usted.
afternoon.
No podía
I'm
haber
sorry,
la
I just
conexión.
couldn't open the
Pues es un gusto
connection.
enorme poder
Well, it
compartir con
is a
ustedes
huge pleasure
este
to be
panel.
able to
Muchísimas
share this
gracias.
panel
Un
with
tema
you.
de enorme
Thank you
importancia,
very
los
much. Such
procesos
an
de
important
transformación
topic
de la
in the
política
processes of
social en
transformation
el mundo
of
y de
social
manera muy
policy
particular en
around the
nuestro
world,
país, un
and
tema
very
que hoy
particularly
se
in our
pone en la
country,
agenda
a
pública como hacía
topic
mucho
that is part of
tiempo o
the
tal vez
public
nunca había
agenda,
sucedido.
as
Así
perhaps
que
had
muy
never been the
contenta de
case
poder
before.
compartir hoy
So I'm
con
very happy
ustedes,
to
con
share
quienes se han
with
conectado
you and with all
este
those of
espacio
you that are connected to our live streaming in order to contribute ideas to this very important space. Thank you. Thank you, Marta, for your input. And now you can continue. So we are ready for the intervention. I'm sorry, I thought it was just the greetings first. Okay, I want to tell you that one of the elements that we have considered to be fundamental for this panel from a feminist approach, the approach of food issues goes through definitely recognizing the very important role that women have played in the management of nutrition in all its aspects. One, because of the creativity that has been immersed in the building of wisdom and knowledge around plants, fruits, produce, small animals, wild animals that can be consumed, and which through the creativity of women, we have instilled wisdom and knowledge in order to turn them into nutritional recipes that end up becoming the foundations of our culture through gastronomy. And in that, there's a first fundamental element of the feminist understanding of policies for serenity and for food serenity and security, which is recognizing this contribution to culture.
Alrededor del cuidado y la gestión del agua, por ejemplo, que también ha estado en manos de las mujeres, sobre todo lo que tiene que ver con el uso del agua para el consumo doméstico y que quienes tienen esa relación y ese cuidado directo son particularmente las mujeres en los hogares tanto rurales como urbanos, no solamente por la práctica, los saberes, las tradiciones alrededor de la preparación de alimentos, sino también porque el agua, como un elemento fundamental de la nutrición, es un recurso vital, limitado, escaso cada vez más, que es gestionado por las mujeres en el marco del trabajo de cuidado. Así que ese es un segundo elemento de la cultura, de ese reconocimiento, de esa dimensión cultural en un enfoque feminista en las políticas alimentarias que yo creo que es fundamental reconocer. Y un tercer elemento asociado, por supuesto, también a prácticas de agricultura, que de hecho algunas hipótesis académicas plantean que son las mujeres quienes
Some
desarrollan
hypotheses state
primario en la
that women
construcción de saberes y prácticas
are the ones
culturales
that carry
agrícolas,
out
las
these
generación
agricultural
en
practices that have
generación,
been transferred from generation to generation that enabled at the end of the day
del modelo
to
civilizatorio
transfer
sedentario a
from settlement movement, and women, of course, in terms of settlement, were vital. And this is at the core that we need to have in mind, because if we recognize the value of the work of that women do in caring and how they pass on this knowledge and territorial appropriation within sovereignty and food sovereignty, we're also recognizing the vital role of women in building their territory and culture. This is just my first idea that I would like to talk about. The second element relates to the economic dimension, recognizing a feminist focus or a feminist perspective. And I would like to talk about specifically what has happened in Colombia, the recognition of a feministic perspective or focus in economy, especially with related to food and food sovereignty. This is vital with three different aspects. The first one, it's to value the work went from the academia, from the different movements, from institutions, from regulations. We talk that care work that women do around the management of food, management of water, management of recipes, of the gastronomical richness, in terms of caring for the nutrition of families and the country at large. That has a value. And let us talk about our experience in Colombia, because here we have a law, which is the law for the economy of care, that has enabled us in the past 8 years to value the entity who is responsible of national statistics, that was called DANE, and that has enabled us to have figures that we had never had before. For example, value how much time do women use in producing food, in caring, and also to have a broken down analysis of those areas that are feminicized in terms of labor. How is it reflected in these figures, statistical figures?
Por ejemplo, baja remuneración en sectores
low in feminized sectors, they're not really well paid, and women where they're well paid in masculinized sectors. So in the construction sector, 1 hour is better paid than in the textile industry, which is highly feminized sector. And so this allows to value the care value of women, where one of the weight, it's really how they manage food, how they grow food, how they care for small animals, and rural women, for example. That valuation of, and also valuing the valuation of the market, or assessing the market by sex, allows us to build a very significant knowledge. First, to address regulations, to create new laws that really mitigate those gender gaps. Secondly, to define by the different institutions public policies that help to mitigate those gaps. But also for women, that quantitative knowledge, that data, which is in theory objective, on the reality that really affects them, it allows them to claim back their rights, not only from their common sense that we women are saying that we have disproportionate burdens, and the work that we do is undervalued under the care. We are saying we have ours, we can quantify it, we can value it, we contribute so much to the country's economy. We have so many negative impacts from an economic perspective. We need to have policies in place to adjust, and we have to claim rights with technical and statistical and scientific evidence. And that, in addition, it contributes that from the institutional level, maybe we can have, it doesn't always happen. And in our case, although we do have data, that hasn't really, we haven't done really much with, we haven't materialized those data in terms of having budgets sensitive to gender and institutional changes. But at least we have the data, and we hope to make progress with that information that we have at hand, with those regulatory and legislative institutional policies. And with that, we can be to make something, to materialize the policies. Another element, and which is also related to the first element that I talked about, the cultural aspect, is that women, within the framework of food security and food sovereignty, we play a significant role in transferring or in passing on knowledge And in that, to that extent, the possibility of transforming, for example, a culture for food sovereignty implies that women are players, important players of those changes in the productive area. So as we receive new proposals for changing conventional agriculture to agroecology, or to the extent urban sectors put in the public agenda the transformation of industrialized diets towards organic diets, or healthier, prepared at home with vegetables, with fruits, and not with cereals or UPPs. Those type of models, then it's easier to reproduce them through women, and of course from women to children, boys, girls, and adolescents. And that leads to fundamental changes that at the end of the day end up affecting the economic model. You would to say something? Yeah, we're trying to do a round of questions for you and Lorenza. So just give you a minute and then I'll ask another question so you can... No, I leave it there. I leave it there. So just to say that those two elements are vital in building public policies, and I will talk to you about new experiences that we've been implementing. Thank you, both of you, for putting at the core this vital or fundamental and transformative dimension of materializing policies, how to care for the standards or regulations that allow us to transform the power relationship. So Lorenza was mentioning the importance of acknowledging, of recognizing and strengthening and protecting what we have and empowering of what we have. There is a DNA, we have a long roadmap of what has been happening. And about Marta, what you were talking about, how important it is to contribute and to launch transformation processes. We have to put this in the public agenda, and to transform also policies from concrete experiences coming from the territories. And this access so important as a caring for an intergenerational relationship and sharing knowledge. You've also talked about data, which is really vital. Data are not neutral. Data allows us to make ourselves visible, to make us be seen. Here we exist, and how we analyze those data, we vindicate those rights. So my question to both of you, so how in this work that you conduct around the care system and in terms of public policies to mitigate and break away barriers or gaps, how are you working with the care and these food variables, how they affect? You were mentioning that about the culture, about gastronomy, about caring for water, about nutrition, about that non-human aspect. But how do we go beyond this challenge and then integrate in a continuous manner within this national work about caring and considering also the data? And not always, it's not easy to quantify the data. So Lorenza, please, the floor is yours. 4 or 5 minutes. And then I will give the floor again to Marta for the second round. The first thing that I would like to tell you, it's how from the Ministry of Equality and Equity, we've put into practice these general reflections that the representative Marta Alfonso mentioned, although it is true that we have some legislations in force with the advocacy of women's movements in the equality ministry, we have this national system, and our main task is really to approach and to really have a society that puts care at the core and to ensure the rights of caregivers and those people that care for others. And the first thing that we've done is to recognize a broad dimension of the work, the care, this care work that go beyond that aspect of humans. So our system of care recognizes caregivers within their differences and diversity. Those caregivers that care for seeds or guardians of seeds or peasants, and those that care for life, where they care for rivers, care about water, and they care for the production of food that goes well beyond the marketability, but this is what's behind cameras. So caregivers, considering them with all the spectrum and with this broad objective to ensure the right to care, being able to care under dignified continuum, and to strengthen community caring policies. In the national care system, we are moving in 5 action lines. The first one relates to strengthening the community caring initiatives. In these community initiatives, we of course recognize the caring initiatives in a broader sense. So we're strengthening people that care for mangroves, rivers, seeds, and that really relate to caring for life as a whole. But we're also strengthening practices of peasant and ethnic communities, who are the ones that really have positioned this collective care at the core. We are also moving, secondly, we're moving into ensuring rights, breaks, and related to the areas that were mentioned by Paola in her. So we are moving forward to ensure dignified life conditions for caregivers. Our third line has to do with an institutional response for those who need support and assistance. So we have a special coordination with a specialized program, which is Zero Hunger. The national care system, it's on the one side, and then we have another program with Zero Hunger. We are trying to coordinate our institutional response, where I will talk to you about what is the institutional response and who do we answer to or what problem we address. But this right to food, which is the main task of the program of Zero Hunger, the priority is those people that require care, the elderly, disabled people, and caregivers, and boys and children. What we've analyzed with statistics that, the data that we have, the access barriers to food have a feminine face, and also of caregivers. So these gaps really deepened when there's a strong care need. So we need to transform culturally to recognize the care. We are working on communication strategies, art-related pedagogical strategies to transform. We related to caring for example, the food care that you mentioned is not deemed as work. So we're trying to change this notion, so to democratize and their values, and its values should be recognized well beyond money. We already have that instrument in Colombia that we measure that and the value that this has in sustaining life, and that goes well beyond but it has an incredible value and thanks to them, we can exist. The fifth line is to strengthen institutional capacity or building institutional capacity, technical guidelines, the project design, technical assistance, to have local systems and territorial entities, etc. These are really broadly the five lines of this, the right and the care to food. They are very closely linked. And with respect to Zero Hunger, which is the program to ensure the human right to food in Colombia. In Colombia, we do have acute problems with food. 15 million people that have faced difficulties to access their food, 2.6 million people that have suffer hunger, and 26% of people in our country reduce their amount of food consumed due to lack of resources. So this is really hunger around the world. It's not about food scarcity, but it's an economic problem of being able to access, and really it's a precarious situation of these people. So the general objective is to really guarantee the right to food, ensuring the access to food, and strengthening local food systems, reducing malnutrition, strengthening community and institutional capacities, and all this focused on food sovereignty. This political commitment to move in that direction in our country. What we're doing with Zero Hungry, we are going to strengthen community dining rooms, which is a very strong figure how people manage this right to food. We have points where we deliver warm food. We will have production initiatives. This is related to food sovereignty. We will do regional centers to provide food. We're talking about, garden seeds, and we will have a plant to transform plantain starch. We are going to begin in 12 departments out of the 32 that we have in Colombia, and we will prioritize 85 municipalities. That's how we've been able to organize ourselves with this proposal of Zero Hunger. Many of these municipalities that are prioritized are also part of the care, because poverty, hunger, all reinforces the burden of caregivers, especially women. So this priority coincides. So I would leave it at that. Our relationship to care and food. Thank you, Lorenza, in the complexity that you've been able to convey and the different levels of actions that you are doing. I will now give the floor to Marta, and I would like to remind you that please speak slowly so our interpreters, they can work, they can do their best. So Marta, I will also give you 5 minutes to address this second round of questions. I would also like to add that all the policies that are now in place at the national government and trying to reform and new proceedings and new legislations for women have contributed to building this national scenario of change with a gender focus. I think we have moved forward, and this government has driven this vocation of transforming food policies in the country on the focus of public policies and also recognizing care within the framework of national economy, of cultural systems, and the need to recognize institutionality to transform the situation of hunger that the country faces. So Lorenza has talked to you about all the programs in that same sense. We are moving forward in the Congress with drafting law. Fian has been come hand in hand with us, and I'm a co-author of the Edward Sarmiento, which is another representative to the chamber. And the idea is to transform citizen participation processes of civil society and the dialogue with the national government that makes decisions in food policies. And so it transforms that dialogue and that participation between the executive branch and civil society vis-a-vis nutritional policies in Colombia, vis-a-vis the right to food, amongst other. So it's a bill that really would become in the intersectional commission for food, adequate food and nutrition, and it moves from a national to a national council where civil society participates. 50%, institutionality 50%. This is what we have in mind. We still have two debates to pass this bill, and I think this will really, definitely will transform the definition and the implementation and monitoring public policies regarding food, because we know about the policies and changes in different countries in Latin America. So the civil society's participation is transformative. It imprints another focus, and in this national council, our proposal is to have the participation of rural women with voice and vote, community associations with voice and vote. We have also a paragraph that promotes parity in terms of the makeup of this system, of the food system in Colombia, among other elements that will contribute. So those care policies are cross-cutting, not only to talk about one care system. One care system cannot really solve the recognition of what we women do about nutrition, life, and that contribution to the economy. But although we need the policy in place and the system, it needs to be cross-cutting and in institutional programs, laws, and etc. And there's a second initiative that is being we're working in Congress, changing law 731, which is a rural woman, which we want to empower peasant woman, fishing woman, fisher woman to transform their lives so they can participate in agrarian policies, in caring for the land and water, in caring for the production of food, and the agency of this woman in public policies, social public policies that in the rural area they're scarce, and the burden it's really supported by women so rural poverty becomes an additional burden for peasant woman or fisher woman, because at the end of the day, if there isn't a state policy, if there are no institutional resources, at the end of the day, they are the ones that need to solve within their survival strategies. They need to solve the water caring for, the care for families, women, children, and adolescents to balance out the lack of institutional presence. Thank you to both of you for your answers. Briefly, I think we're quite delayed. I would like to highlight two vital elements. On the one hand, that it is, I understand that a fundamental area is to transform policies, but also governance with that dialogue that is taking place, that interaction between the subjects of rights and the state. It's also a way of a new commitment also. And Lorenza, what she was talking about the importance of having this intersectional focus that take into account a holistic view of what is the public work from the community work they carry out, but training, the welfare, the well-being, cultural transformation. So if you agree, I would like now to talk another, the first.
Entonces, una de las personas escribe el Sistema Nacional de Cuidado que se está
One of the persons say the national care system that is being built includes in its variables of measurements food care. How could you give visibility to this in the statistics that are already showing food to right and to nutrition? And the other question that we read is, in the current scenario of reductions in public investment and the lack of guarantee to economic, social, and cultural rights, what strategies could be adopted for the implementation of care systems that require important investment? And let me go to another question. How will the wisdom and knowledge of our indigenous peoples be taken into account in the system of care and in the policies, programs, projects, and initiatives that reach the indigenous communities? I think that some of these elements were already mentioned by you one way or another around these questions. But well, you have him here so that you can start a dialogue with the questions that are coming directly. And just as in the previous round, just 1 minute for your message, clear message. Lorenza, let's start with you. Thank you. In Colombia, we have the National Survey on the Use of Time, which includes some questions about food care, in other words, the caring of animals and planting or seeding time, recollection of firewood, but this is not very detailed. However, they're significant. So precisely today, we'll be signing an agreement with our statistics department in order to expand this form regarding the use of farm and reach out to different cities and, sorry, not cities, I apologize, territories where the production of food in the country concentrates. So this is a task that is pending. Yes, we have to go deeper into that. Now, regarding strategies, when there's a little budget, which is the point of question two, Colombia is not a rich country. Our budget is quite limited. And what we have done, and in fact, with this mission, the Ministry of Equality and Equity was created, which is to prioritize our institutional response on those resources with technical criteria where there are more demands for care, more poverty, more racialized migrant population, and where there is a deficit, a bigger deficit in the guarantee of rights. So I think that this is a tool that is known in public policy that can help us advance the framework of limitations and to implement policies of care. Regarding the aspect of the indigenous peoples, we have more than 100 indigenous peoples in Colombia. And for that, we have a whole process of consultation that we will be using with the indigenous peoples to develop the indigenous component in the national care system so that it'll respond to their own systems and to their own cosmovision and beliefs and cultural practices on care. So that's what we will be doing in our country. We will be working directly with the communities and indigenous peoples in this indigenous component in the system of care. And I will stop there. Thank you, Lorenza. One last question from from
Creo
Laura.
que Lorenza ha
I think that
planteado la
Lorenza
respuesta muy bien en
has
el marco de la
included
institucionalidad
everything in
que
her
representa.
answers
Yo
regarding the
solamente
framework and the institution that
agregaría
she
que
represents. I would only add
estamos en un
that we
momento de la
are in a
historia del
moment in
país, en
history, in a
Colombia,
moment in our country, in Colombia,
que nos debe permitir una mayor
that should allow
conciencia
us
a los
to
actores que
raise more
acompañan
awareness
externos que
in the
acompañan
external
a Colombia, por
actors
ejemplo, a
that
través de
accompany
cooperación
Colombia through
internacional, a
international
las
cooperation,
empresas
for
que hacen
instance, or the
presencia
businesses
en
that are
nuestro país para
present
la
in our
producción de
country
alimentos o a los
in food
mismos
production,
empresarios
or
nacionales de
entrepreneurs
la
themselves from
industria
the country
agrícola.
in the agricultural
Nos queda una
industry.
reflexión muy
Now,
importante para el
there's
momento en
one
términos de
important
poder
thought
valorar
or
el
reflection for
rol
this moment in
fundamental de las
terms of
mujeres
valuing
en
the
las
fundamental role
políticas
played by
alimentarias y
women
en las
in
políticas de
food
cuidado.
policies and care
Como lo he
policies.
planteado
As I have
anteriormente,
mentioned before,
esa valoración del
this
papel y del rol de las mujeres a nivel
valuation
cultural,
of the
económico
role played
y
by
social
women
en materia de
in the cultural,
políticas
economic, and social
alimentarias y
levels in terms
nutricionales
of
va
food and
a
nutrition
garantizar
policies will guarantee
poder bajar a las
our
comunidades,
ability
a las nuevas
to
generaciones que en últimas son las que garantizan la sostenibilidad de un
bring
cambio y
down to the
transformación, va
communities,
a garantizar
to bring down to the
que
new
esas
generations, the ones
políticas
that will
bajen más
sustain the
rápido y que
change,
esos
will
cambios
guarantee that these
culturales
policies
y
will
sociales,
permeate
que ese es
down
el
more
primer
quickly, and
dispositivo
that
para que
those
pueda haber
cultural
cambios
and social
económicos,
changes, which
se
are the first
materialicen
elements in order
con
to have economic
mayor
changes,
celeridad.
will
Las mujeres
materialize
somos fundamentales
more
en la construcción de
rapidly.
cultura, como lo
Women are
hablaba hace un
fundamental
momento,
in the building
en el
of culture, as I
sostenimiento de la
just said a
economía
moment ago,
y sobre
in the
todo
sustainment
en
of the
la
economy also,
transformación de una
and especially
cultura
in the
alimentaria
transformation
que
of
parta
a
desde la
food
producción
culture
de alimentos sobre
that
base de
stems
una
from the
lógica
production of food, hopefully
agroecológica,
with an
cuidado del agua
ecologic
como un bien
uh,
fundamental para la
approach,
vida,
and the care of water as a fundamental
la
need for life,
transformación
the
o más bien la
transformation, or rather
construcción,
the
creación
reproduction
también,
and
innovación de
creation and
prácticas culturales
innovation
alrededor de
of
los
cultural
alimentos
practices around food
y de la
products
nutrición.
and around
Así que
nutrition.
eso va a ir
So
generando un
this will
cambio
gradually
histórico
lead
que
to
creo
a
es
historic
fundamental
change
alimentarlo
that I
desde las
think
mujeres y
is
debería ser un
fundamental to be
elemento
fed from the women
importante en
and
las
should be an
políticas
important
económicas,
element
tanto de
in the
actores privados
economic
como de la
policies,
misma
both
agencia
regarding private
pública,
actors
en
and the
los
public
actores de
agencies,
cooperación internacional que trabajan
and in
estos
the
temas
actors
alimentarios.
in
Y sé que hoy nos
economic
encontramos
cooperation
aquí
that work on
hablando de
these
esto
topics. And
porque
I know
así
that
mismo
we're
ustedes
talking
lo
about
entienden
this
y a
today
nivel
because you
social
understand that
y
too.
político
And at the
en
political
las
and
mujeres
social
y en los
levels,
movimientos de
in
mujeres
women
para
and in women's
empoderarnos desde
movements,
cambio
in
cultural.
order to empower ourselves of this cultural change.
Gracias un millón. Nos llevamos
A million
muy en cuenta
thanks.
algunas de las palabras claves que nos han
We will
podido
take away
ofrecer y
many
gracias
keywords that you
también
have offered to
por
us
cuidar
today. And
y
thank you very
compartir,
much
¿no? La
for
labor y
caring and for
saberes
sharing
desde
the
sus
work
propias perspectivas.
and
Creo
your
que nos quedamos
knowledge from your own
muy fuerte
perspectives.
con la idea de que
I
es
think that we'll
importante no
stay with this
solo
idea that it
reconocer
is important not
las
only to
famosas
recognize
S
the
alrededor del
famous
cuidado,
R's that
pero
exist
también
around
saber
care,
que hay que hacer
but
una
also
labor
to
para
know
cuidar en condiciones
that
dignas,
work
¿no? Y
has to be done in order
reconocer no
to
solo
be
el
able to give
cuidado, sino
care under
también el
dignified
derecho
conditions,
a
and not
ser
only
cuidada
recognizing
y
care,
a la
but the right to
autocuidado.
being cared
La
and the right
importancia
to self-care.
de
Also, the
transformar
importance of
radicalmente a partir de
transforming
la dimensión
radically
social y
based on the
cultural,
social and cultural
digamos, las relaciones de
dimensions,
poder,
talking about the
particularmente
relationships
colocando
of
la figura
power,
pública
particularly
y
putting
normativa,
them
los
in the
temas que son
regulatory and public
fundamentales
agenda,
para la
those topics that are
autodeterminación y el
fundamental for
empoderamiento de las mujeres,
self-determination and empowerment of
también a
women.
través de
Also
unas cajas
through
de herramientas
toolkits that we can resort to in these change of paradigm where this reading, we can see women as the main protagonists in these transformative innovations at which we are politically and in terms of food policies as builders of these alternatives which exist, but that have to be made visible. For instance, in the agroecological experiences, the dimension of culture and knowledge, we heard about material and immaterial or unmaterial territories, what is quantifiable or not, and keeping open attention. That's part of the feminist commitment in the institution so that these policies can fill gaps and be transformative from the social, cultural, and economic frameworks. The alternative forms from the bottom up of participatory governance that put the subjects of rights at the core, and especially the importance that we heard about looking at ourselves in the historic moment that we are experiencing. This is long-winded topics that we have in front of us. So I would like to thank you very, very much for devoting this time to us, for sharing your knowledge with us. We will continue learning and interacting. 1 million thanks, Loren. 1 million thanks, Maria, for being with us. So now we can move to the final phase of these dialogues, and that would be dialogue number 3 on the right to care and its connection with the right to food. For that, I will give the floor to Denise Cordova. She's a professor at Central Florida University. She's a defendant and a teacher in human rights. She's a member of the board of directors of FIAN at present. So we will give her the floor in order to facilitate the last dialogue, which puts this last connection at the center, since we have talked about care as a relationship of eco-interdependencies. This is yet another dimension that we will be exploring today. Denise, the floor is yours for the next 45 minutes. Thank you, Teresa. And well, it is my pleasure to facilitate this third dialogue with 3 experts, Arely Collazos, Laura Pautase, and Soledad Garcia Muñoz, in order to go deeper in the connection between right to care and right to food. Arely Collazos, she's a seat custodian. She's a member of the Committee for the Defense of the African Cauca territory. She is the owner of El Renacer Seed House. She's a coordinator of the Afro Food Market Perico Negro. She's a nurse aide, and for 10 years she's been doing defense actions of the traditional farms, conservation of seeds, and promotion of solidarity economy. I will also introduce the other 2 panelists before I turn it over to Aurelia. Laura Patazzi, she's a lawyer from the Córdoba University in Argentina. She specialized in planning and management of social policies and a PhD from Universidad Nacional de Buenos Aires in the area of social law. Today, she is an independent researcher at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research and the Institute of Social and Legal Research in the School of Law in Universidad de Buenos Aires. She's a professor, pregraduate and postgraduate, consultant in ECLAC, and she's a pioneer in cultural research with a gender perspective in public policy. She's an independent expert and the president of the Working Group for the Analysis of National Reports under the Protocol of San Salvador. She's a pioneer researcher in defining the right to care and self-care. She leads the interdisciplinary working group, Social Rights and Public Policies in Universidad de Buenos Aires. And last, we have Soledad Garcia Muñoz. She's a lawyer, ecofeminist, an expert in human rights, gender development, the environment, a visiting professor, and she is in the Robert L. Training, and she's a distinguished fellow in the Human Rights Institute of the Law School in Georgetown Law University in the United States. She was the first special rapporteur on economic, social, and environmental rights of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. During these years, she was part of the working group of the San Salvador working group in the OAS, where she was between 2022 and 2023. From 2009 until her incorporation to CIDH, she was the representative of the Inter-American Institute on Human Rights based in Montevideo, Uruguay, where she organized 6 editions of the Brazilian Interdisciplinary Course on Human Rights. She was the president of Amnesty International in Argentina. She was the vice president of the International Executive Committee and president of the Working Group on Gender and Diversity. And well, as you can see, this is going to be a very enriching dialogue. Each panelist will have 10 minutes to reflect upon the connections that exist between the right to care and the right to food from their own experiences and their own knowledge. And then we will open the floor for questions from our audience. So, Areli, you have the 10 first minutes in this dialogue. Please go ahead.
Tiene la palabra, si me escucha.
Can you hear me? You have the floor. Areli?
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Ya. Soy Areli Collazos del
I
norte
am
del
Areli
Cauca.
Collazos, and I'm in the north of the department of Cauca
Vocación agrícola.
with an agricultural vocation.
Me ha llevado
And this has
a
led me
interpretar y a conocer
to interpreting and to knowing
claramente lo que es el derecho humano a la
about
alimentación.
the right to food.
Acá tenemos dos casas de
We
semillas,
have 2
las
seed
cuales
houses
una es
here,
Renacer
one of them being
y la otra
Renacer,
es Refugio de la Agrodiversidad.
and the other one is Refugio de la Agrodiversidad, Shelter of
Hemos visto
Agrodiversity.
en todo nuestro recorrer
In our
que la
history,
mujer desde unos inicios que llegó al territorio
that women
ya
from
de
the very
forma
beginning in this
esclavizada,
territory was already
ella traía
enslaved,
en sus
and she brought with
peinados
her
las semillas que luego
the seeds
fueron plantadas en un
that
bosque
were
tropical
then
seco
planted in a dry
y
tropical
fueron
forest
modificando
and that
para
were
llevarlo a lo
gradually
que es hoy la
modified
finca tradicional.
to come to what we have today as the
Las semillas
traditional farm.
criollas nativas
Creole native
son
seeds
como política llevarlas a cada encuentro que nosotros compartimos en los
are like
espacios
policies. We bring them to every
se
space
realizan
that we
acá
go
en el norte
to
del Cauca, mi territorio,
and that are
por
held
medio de
here
la
in
semilla
the north
y
part of our
por la
territory by
colaboración
the
también
seed
de FIAN.
school and through the
Este
collaboration of
ejercicio
FIAN.
nos permite
This exercise allows us
realizar una vida que podamos propagar
to
en
have
alimentos vivos,
life that
semillas,
we can propagate
porque
in
la
life
semilla es
elements and
poder.
seeds because seeds are
Perpetuar estas
power.
semillas que nuestros ancestros nos
Perpetuating
dejaron.
these seeds that our
Y también
ancestors left us is
tener esas semillas
important, and to
para
have these
luego
seeds
llevarlas a
so that
nuestras
then
mesas.
we can
Son
have them
semillas
on our
reales, semillas que no
tables.
han sido
These are
manipuladas
real seeds,
genéticamente,
things that have not been
semillas
genetically modified,
que sí tienen los
seeds
contenidos
that have
nutricionales que requerimos.
the required nutritional content.
Vení, 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 que no me... Ay, perdón, un momentico, si me escuchan. Es que no sé
I
por
don't
qué.
think you're hearing me very well.
Sí, abrí la cámara y no sé por qué no me...
I opened the camera, I don't know why.
Ah, ya. Perdón, ¿me escucharon hasta dónde?
Okay, could you hear me so
Sí te
far?
escuchamos, Arely.
Yes, we did,
Bueno,
Arely.
muchas
We heard
gracias.
you. Thank you.
Entonces, en ese orden de ideas,
So,
nuestras
in
fincas
this spirit,
tradicionales
our traditional
es un
farms
espacio
are a space
donde nosotros propendemos por todas las variedades
where
que
we
tenemos acá en el territorio,
care for all the varieties that we
tanto
grow here in our
vegetales,
territory,
plátano, yuca,
fruits,
maíz,
plantain, cassava,
pero tenemos
corn,
unas
maize,
problemáticas en las
but we have a
cuales se nos
problem
ha ido viendo amenazada estos espacios
because our space has
por la
been or
minería
is
de
being
arcilla
threatened by
y
clay
también
mining
por el monocultivo de la caña que ha sido
and
intensificado
sugarcane plantations
progresivamente,
that have
también
become
la
progressively
llegada
intensified,
de los maíces transgénicos
and the
que
arrival of
atentan contra
transgenic
las semillas
corn
nativas
that go
porque
against
estas
native
pueden
seeds because
mezclarse
they can
y
be mixed
ver
up
dañar
and be
y cambiar
harmed,
su naturaleza.
and therefore their nature
Desde
changed.
el punto que nosotros hemos tenido que conformar un comité. Este
So
comité
we have put together
está
a committee
realizado o se realizó desde hace 7 años atrás,
that was established
mirando la
7 years
amenaza que
ago
teníamos frente
to
a
analyze
la
the threat that we
posibilidad de
had
tener un
vis-a-vis the
espacio
possibility of having a
donde
space
cultiváramos libre de
for
químicos,
to grow products free of
donde
chemicals,
no
where we
hubiera
could
daños ambientales, porque
not
la
be
finca
affected by
es un espacio
environmental
donde hay
damages because the farm
generación de
is a
oxígeno,
space where
no se
you
generan
generate
quemas.
oxygen, you
Es
don't have
totalmente
any burns,
compatible con
and
el
it's
medio
completely
ambiente.
compatible with the environment.
Evelyn, perdón por interrumpirte. ¿Tú crees que podrías
Areli,
mover
I'm
un
sorry
poco,
if
levantar
I
la cámara
interrupt
para
you.
poder
Do you
ver
think you can move
tu
up the
rostro
camera
completo?
so we can see your face?
Aquí, sí, ya.
Excelente, gracias.
Okay, I can see now. Thank you.
Entonces, desde el Comité por la
So,
Defensa del Territorio,
in the
hemos
committee
estado
for the
tomando
strategies in
acciones
the territory, we
en
have
las
been taking
cuales
actions in
hemos
which
sensibilizado a la
we have
población
raised
del
awareness among the
campo, a los
population living in the
agricultores
fields,
en
the
este,
farmers,
con estos conflictos que se han
around these
generado acá en el
conflicts
territorio, pero que
that have
como
been generated
cada
here in our
quien
territory.
va caminando por su lado,
Each one
no
was
hubieran impactado.
going on separate
Entonces,
ways.
ya con esas investigaciones
So with these
hemos empezado a
explanations,
hacer gestiones
we've been able
tanto
to
a nivel
take action
social como
both
también hemos
socially
tocado las puertas del
and
Estado.
also reaching out to the
En esta
state.
semana, justo en esta semana estamos
And this
haciendo la
week,
celebración de la
precisely,
cuarta semana por las
we are
fincas tradicionales
celebrating
acá en el
the fourth
municipio de
week
Villarrica, pero
for the
también
traditional
tenemos
farms
influencia en
here
otros
in the
municipios
municipality of
que
Villarrica,
comprende
but we also have
el
influence in
corredor
all the
afroalimentario,
municipalities
como
that
lo
make
hemos
up the
denominado. Porque con
Afro
esta apuesta
food
queremos
corridor, as we
brindar
have
a
called
todas
it,
las
because with this
fincas
tool, we want
tradicionales que
to
aún
bring together the few
hay
traditional farms that still
en el
survive
territorio.
in the
Entonces
territory.
están el municipio de
So we
Villarrica,
have the
el municipio de
municipality of
Puerto
Villarrica,
Tejada, Santander de
Puerto
Quilichao,
Tejada, Santander
Caloto,
de Quilichao,
Padilla, Corinto y
Caloto,
Miranda.
Padilla, Corinto, and
Aquí,
Miranda.
mayoritariamente la
So
población
here,
es afro.
the population is
También hay
mostly African
mestizos
descendant.
y la
There's
indígena.
also mestizo and indigenous population present.
Aquí estamos también realizando unos espacios donde se
And
dan
we have
mercados
spaces
afroalimentarios,
for
donde le
Afro
pedimos a
inventory
los
markets
agricultores
where
que
we
traigan
ask
sus productos
farmers
para
to
que
bring their
sean
products
vendidos y
to be
también
sold
intercambiados.
and
Y en cada uno de
exchanged.
estos espacios también
And in
llevamos
each one of
semillas,
those spaces, we come with
porque la
seeds
idea
too,
es
because the
que
idea
nuestra
is
gente entienda y se
that
dé
our people
cuenta
will
que
understand
la
and will
mayoría
realize
muchos de los productos que están
that the seeds
comprando en
and many of
supermercados
the products that they're
provienen
buying
de
at
semillas transgénicas,
supermarkets
semillas que ya han sido
come from
manipuladas
genetically modified seeds,
y
transgenic
no es
seeds,
lo mismo
and it's not the same
consumir un maíz
to
nativo o
consume
criollo que
native or
un
Creole
maíz que
corn
ha
or
sido
maize
manipulado de
than
esta
corn
manera.
that has been genetically
Y
modified.
además debemos de cuidar
And
nuestras
also,
semillas
we have to look
porque
after our
de ella
seeds
depende
because
nuestra pervivencia y
our
también que se
survival
transmita
depends on that.
esta información de
And also the
generación en
fact that this
generación
information will
que
be
han
passed
venido
from
nuestros
generation to
ancestros
generation,
cultivando.
information that comes all the way
Nosotros
from our
acá
ancestors as they have grown them.
buscamos siempre
We
que
always look
nuestras semillas
for
sean
seed that our
guardadas,
seeds
sean
be safeguarded
cuidadas,
and
sean
cared for
protegidas,
and protected
sean compartidas
and shared,
y también que esa información
and
genética
also
en ellas
that
nunca
the
se daña
genetic
y nunca
information
se
that they
cambia.
contain will never be damaged or changed.
También hemos hecho en el corredor afroalimentario,
And the Afro-Food Corridor,
lo hemos construido con unos principios
we
que lo
have put
gobierna.
together
Y
some
creo
governing
que el
principles to
primero
it.
de los principios es la
And the first one
conservación de
of
las
these
semillas
principles
nativas
is the
criollas.
conservation of Creole native seeds.
Debemos de cultivar todos nuestros alimentos,
We must grow
nuestros
all our
productos que van
food
para ser base de esos alimentos,
on the products that will become the basis for these
teniendo
food
en
products,
cuenta que
taking into
debemos de
account
hacer prácticas
that we
agroecológicas
have to implement agroecological
que
practices in
incluyan
doing so.
Para
I'm sorry
avisarle
if I
que
interrupt you
estamos
again,
ya
just to tell
aquí
you
en Zoom, no
that
sé si ya podemos ir
your
cerrando con nuestra
time
primera
has
presentación.
ended,
Habrá más
so
tiempo
if we
después para
could
volver a
close this
conversarlo
presentation,
sin
and there
grandes
will be
preguntas
more
y
time
seguir con
later
esa
to
primera
answer any
presentación.
questions that we may get from our audience. And I apologize for these. No, I'm almost finished.
entonces aquí nosotros hemos
So here
diseñado un
we have
corredor
designed
agroalimentario
an
que
Afro-food
es un
corridor,
conjunto
which
de
is a
fincas
set
tradicionales como
of
un
traditional farms
bosques secos tropicales. Esto era lo que
in
encontraron
the
los
dry tropical forest,
esclavizados cuando llegaron
which
acá.
is what the
Y
slaves
esto
found when they
configura
arrived
lo
here.
que es un
And this makes
verdadero
up
paisaje
what
cultural
is a true
ancestral en el norte del Cauca.
ancestral cultural landscape in the north of Cauca.
Muchas gracias por esas
Thank you
reflexiones.
very much for your thoughts, Areli.
Bueno, me gustaría invitar a Laura
I would like to
a
invite
responder
Laura
esta misma
now
pregunta, ¿no?
to
Desde
answer
su
the same
perspectiva,
question. From
¿cuáles son
your
las
perspective,
conexiones entre
which are the
estos dos
connections that
derechos? Y luego me
exist
gustaría
between
que
these
podamos
two
quizás
rights?
responder
And perhaps I would
a
like to
Arely un
answer
poco lo que ella
also
nos ha brindado una visión
to
holística del
Areli.
derecho
She
a la
has given us a
alimentación
holistic
desde sus
view of the
experiencias
right to
como
food
defensora
based on her
del
expertise and
territorio,
experience
de la
as
conservación
the
de
advocate of
semillas,
the territory and the
para así
conservation
poder
of
empezar a
seeds,
identificar
so
las
that by doing
diversas
so we can
dimensiones que
start
tiene el
identifying
cuidado
the various
alimentario
dimensions that food
en
care
aras de un
has
reconocimiento de justicia
in
social para
favor
las
of a
personas
recognition
que
of
ejercen el
justice
cuidado en el
on the
territorio.
people
Entonces yo
that
ahora la
provide
invito
this care in the territory. So
a
Laura,
reflexionar
please,
durante los siguientes
let's
10 minutos.
have some thoughts on this in the next 10 minutes.
Muchísimas gracias por esta invitación.
Thank you very much for this invitation. My thanks to my peers from FIAN International. We have been immersed in this very interesting debate for so many years in relation to the right to adequate food. And I applaud the incorporation in relation to the relationship with the right to care. I must clarify that my presentation was somewhat out of date and I'm not part of the working group of the San Salvador Protocol. I was part of it together with Soledad, but today I'm not playing that function. So having said this, I also celebrate the approach that Adelie gave us in relation to this holistic view of the right to food. And we are crossing a particularly important moment in Latin America. Why is it particular? Well, there are many specificities. We've always been characterized by those specificities, but we are at a time where almost 20 years ago, with all the activism of feminist academia and having dialogues with feminist movements and linkages with certain spheres of advocacy, we've been able to install in the Latin American agenda the relevance of care as work, but also the relevance of work as a human right, the human right to provide care, to be cared for, and to self-care. And this conservation, which is a very important process because it happens as part of a process in Latin America, it's a process where by applying certain methodologies with academic contributions and this dialogue, for instance, applying the methodology of the approach of human rights, we were able to realize that in all the international treaties and agreements, starting with the very first instruments, as a global community, we committed ourselves to recognize, respect, and guarantee, and here there's a direct commitment to the states, of the human rights to care, to be cared, and to self-care. What does this global commitment mean? Well, the very first instrument looked at certain instances like protection to maternity, protection to the elderly, the concept of a dignified life that relates directly to the care responsibilities. As we know, and many of the examples that we just heard of have to do with this condition of cross-cutting activity. Nobody can live in this world. And as a human species, we're one of the few species that, if we're not taken care of when we're born, we could never survive. So we are more autonomous and we can be more autonomous relating to our care. But this is directly linked to the right to food in an interdependent manner. An infant cannot survive unless care is given to him or her, and also if food is not given to him or her. And as we grow, we become more autonomous in relation to these two vital functions. But these are two vital functions that are interdependent, while at the same time involving others. These are not necessarily individual actions, and just as food, and by the way, for many years we've had very interesting contributions from anthropology regarding the kitchens and this environment in which culture is built and where a holistic view is conveyed or transmitted, as we recently heard, but also in a process of one of the forms of labor production or work production that the history of mankind has gone through. The work in the form of care is one of the most perfect forms of work. It's a global chain of work. It's simply that because it was concentrated on women because of this patriarchal assignment through history, it was not made visible in terms of its value, production, and generation of economic value. But also, as the feminist economies have taught us this unmeasurable contribution for the sustainability of life. So, throughout history, we have looked at two practices, and I'm talking about them as practices. Initially, they involve labor, which is care of the food that will be accompanying us throughout our life. Now, they're not the same thing, and this is the important point, that this contribution of care as a human right also allows us to identify why was I saying that we're at such important moment at a regional level? Because these conceptual ideas and this differentiation in recognizing, first of all, that caring is a work, paid or unpaid, depends on the orders of gender. And this patriarchal assignment of care on women in the private spheres made it an unpaid labor which lacks visibility and that is not considered as labor or work. If a woman in her household spent the whole day ironing, well, very surely when we asked her why she was ironing, she was looking at a soap opera. When we asked her, what did you do? Nothing. I was just watching a Netflix series because not even her can see this as labor. Something similar happens with food. A woman that spent long hours processing food and making use of the different flavors coming from different customs and balancing the different nutritional flavors will probably feel that she's doing an act of love. And if there's love, you will be feeding people with nutrition, but there's this unpaid, invisible work there. And the most important point, where we see an important contribution from the feminist point of view, is that it is not distributed.
We all have obligations with respect to what it means to care up for others, to care for ourselves, and also to be cared for. And therefore, that construction that we've identified in these three moments that have been recognized in this sphere of human rights led us to identify that care is a human right. So in this line of thought, the regulatory evolution was very important. So as we said at the beginning, all international treaties and contracts, the universal rights of protection for human rights in United Nations, and also in the Inter-American, also the protection of rights of elderly, which is the first legal international instrument that speaks concretely about care. So that academic evolution is reflected in this Inter-American instrument. This requires more emphasis, not only to ratify it, but also to conduct the analysis of its scope. But what is important is going to link that care right of elderly in terms of their autonomy. And also it will be gender focused, intersectionality, and also with human rights. But let me go back to the initial question that we will be discussing, and we will talk about it. It seems that care and food are the same thing, but they're not. And this implies a very important process, the enshrine what we see that the right to care and the right to food is enshrined in human rights. We will have at the end of the year more interpretative instruments, but right now in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, we have the consultative opinion 31 with Argentina in 2023. The Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity, today it has been shut down by the current government. But at that time, so that we took this question so that they interpret the scope in autonomous manner on the right to care, to be cared for, and to have self-care. So very likely before the end of the year, we will have standards that will be linked with all those other standards of the right to food. So we are not in a game that adds up to zero. We are clear. We have a clear path. We have in the Vienna conference, when in the action platform in Article 5, they talk about all human rights are universals, interdependent, and the states require satisfy political, social, cultural, and economic rights under the same conditions. So this last minute that I have, I would like to strengthen this interdependence that is so necessary between the right to food and the right to care. But this necessary interdependence will become more visible. And for women, it's difficult for them to realize that the food they provide or nourishment they provide in their homes should be distributed among all the people. These are the states with positive and negative actions. Social and community organizations within the family, men have always been cared for, but they don't actively care for. And we have concrete data with surveys that we've done, and also with respect to markets. So in this diamond of care, we need an active defense of the right to food and the right to care, and to really describe or devise its scope, and especially the right to food, the right to be cared for, to care for, and to self-care. So thank you, Laura, for your reflections and for telling us a little bit of this important role of Latin America in having this right enshrined in the United Nations, and also talking about the interpretative standards are under process, and we are waiting to have this, to make this interdependence evidence. Now I would like to give the floor to Soledad so she can answer the same question from her own perspective. Thank you, Soledad.
Hola, muy buenos días a
Good
todas.
morning, all of us. Thank you, Porfia and Colombia, for inviting me to this important and necessary event, because these are critical topics within the framework of the pandemic, especially the poverty, which is one of the great challenges from a human rights perspective. They talk about planetary crisis, but also a climate crisis, and the historic in terms of care. We live as a humanity because of the role that has condemned women to care for and to make our societies work without being recognized and without being cared for adequately, but just putting them sort of in a category of sufferers of violence. So I would like to greet the panelists and moderators. And I've been learning a lot from you, and I would like to share my reflection from a lawyer perspective, a feminist perspective, and from my field experience. Developing protection measures and standards on the right to care and the right to food. It's undeniable that there is a link between these two elements. The right to care cannot be protected without protecting adequately the right to food. And as we know, the right to care is being right now, it's in the process of being recognized. So I would like to talk about five broad spectrum or that my experience as of 1917 in the work group of San Salvador and in the current work that I conduct in the academia. This mandate, the commission decided to create a special rapporteur on being the first rapporteur. I was able to think about this multi-right mandate. What would the rights to be recognized that should be identified? And from that perspective, that ecofeminist perspective, I had the opportunity to raise the flag of the care, especially during the pandemic. The commission was really to bring this care into the right that was affected due to the pandemic. Of course, also the right to health. So the right to care is being configured as in relation with the elderly, with people with disabilities. And although we have inter-American instruments do not really recognize it implicitly, as Laura mentioned, the Inter-American Convention on the right of elderly in Article 12, the elderly have the right to receive long-term care. So there is an evolution that we have the Inter-American Human Rights Court. They have the consultative opinion, and they're close to adopting this new slide. In the case of the Commission, it's been reflected in some standards and concrete protection measures, the precautionary measure that is enforced, especially on elderly who are part of the Wayu community in Riohacha, Uribia, which is this is a precautionary measure that was coming from 2015 to 2017 and was explicitly consider them in the right to care, because there is an undeniable link between the right to care and the right to food that should be included in the legal practice and economic political practices or international policies. But I would like to refer to the need to see this relationship between care and food as human rights from an integral perspective. There is a relationship between all human rights, as it was on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Inter-American and the Vienna Conference of 1993. So all human rights and all those rights that are to come, because human rights are progressive, they appear or they become recognized in time. We need to acknowledge them and to recognize them without hierarchy. Although there seems to be some hierarchy on which is more important, we need to break away all the myths in terms of that they are right, second generation rights. No, the climate emergency, the pandemic has shown to what extent these are vital rights for our dignity and for caring for nature, the right to food and care. It's also, but we need also to protect the right to care, to protect the right to food and other human rights. So we need to, from that perspective, that it's really joint and severally, and it's my mantra, and this is what I defend in elder work: the right to water, the right to water, the right to health. I was thinking about the pandemic, the solutions, the resolutions that we prepared during that period, the standards that we also developed that I think are relevant for this debate on non-transmissible diseases and human rights, which also makes this link between food and other human rights. So I've had the opportunity to monitor the use of pesticides, the impact of monocrops, for example, African palm, in the entire region, and the consequent impact on the people who advocate for the defense of the planet, especially women. But let us think about their right to work and the right to unionize when this work is informal and indiscriminate. So we also have cultural rights. I'm not going to go into social security, for example, of caregivers, women that dedicate themselves to care, unpaid work. They can't contribute to their social security, and then the environment. And so I would like here to mention the ICASU agreement to supplement the legal, national, regional, and international framework. And I think it would have potential in the topic that we're dealing with today. I don't have time right now to talk about it. Also, from my perspective, ecofeminist perspective, those human rights can be separate from nature rights. So we have made progress in our region. In Colombia, for example, the ruling of the Atrato River of the Amazon, they really understand, as a consultative opinion of 23, that we can't separate human rights from the protection of nature, as not because it is useful for humans, but from this perspective of this interrelationship. We took it to the International Court for Human Rights in a recent hearing on the consultative opinion on the climate emergency, which is another context. Just like the care right, we need explicitly to include that criterion, hermeneutic criterion. I would also like to take advantage to make a call and develop new universal inter-American standards of human rights to use the national definition of human rights so that public institutions and private institutions are accountable. Social movements and social society in our region, they are very evident. I'm going to try to be right from my perspective, eco-feminist perspective. And I think we need to state the premise, but the great progress relates to women and feminist movements. Nothing would work in our society without women. Not only the stoves or those women that fetch water, but from the time we are born, when they feed their boys and girls. I was also thinking about something that really enrages me. You know, men are chefs, but women are cooks. But these are women, and this pandemic really made evident the need for care in our society. Of course, the need to care for all the caregivers and to foster self-care. Sorry about interrupting. Yes, we're running out of time.
Tengo aquí el cronómetro. Así que
I have the timer. So let me summarize the perspective of development and inequality. We can't analyze this topic without thinking about the amount of people that live under poverty in our region, the right to businesses and human rights. I was able to work with them, and I continue working, and not only during the rapporteur, but the report on businesses and human rights and climate emergency, and this intersectional perspective, not only looking at populations that we recognize, but also populations that, due to poverty, they're not street dwellers. I was able to see this in Los Angeles, in Brazil, or people who work informally, or so we need all these perspective, but also political will to apply the human rights perspective in a cross-cutting way, including humans and nature. We need to understand care as a critical aspect for society, with this institutional coordination that our Colombian peer was talking about, and to make all economic and all players accountable, not only economic players. And we talked about the High Commissioners for Human Rights. We need to walk to an economy for human rights in this region, which is the most unequal region in the world. And that's caring for people, nature, and that's intervening in fiscal and economic policies with this right, and the right to development should put at the core the well-being of the population, but not only the profits. So just to apply those principles, and that's what I would like to encourage to continue using strategically all international national bodies to protect these rights and all those rights that are jointly and severally working together. Thank you, Soledad. I think there's some questions. Maybe I would give each panel member 1 minute. Corelli, there's a question on how you've been recognized, or the work that you've done as a seed garden between your leadership. And Laura and Soledad, you've talked about this topic, but given the process of the right to care at regional level, let's continue reflecting. What are the obligations that states have vis-a-vis this right from an intersectional perspective, and how do you relate this with the right to food? 1 minute for each. We're running out of time. I would like to say at the beginning, by nature, we've been caregivers, but caregivers should also be cared for so that she can care for others. So we as women, we have had to care outside when we work, and to care within our family, inside our family. So it's double work that we do, and it's not recognized. We as women, we've always been in charge of feeding our family members from the time they're in the womb, because that's when we begin to feed them. Feeding begins with the umbilical cord, then with breastfeeding, and then preparing the food that we're going to provide our families. But this is made invisible by the state, by society at large. And the woman is wasting, or their life is sort of going, but that's not seen. So the state should turn their eyes towards women, to that being that has given everything, because we are the ones that multiply what we gather in every live expression. We multiply. And this is something that we need to be recognized in the history of life, the fundamental role that woman plays and has had over their shoulder and has never been recognized. I also talked about the way and how the Afro woman reached this territory, and she planted the seeds, she cared for the seeds, and the little seeds that we still have with so many struggles because they've always been attacked, and we've kept them because I don't know if you have any other question. No, thank you, Areli. Now we move for Laura and Soledad, just the reflections to be able to close this panel. Thank you. It was really interesting. What happens with obligations by states? These are concrete obligations. They are determined. And then again, what we were emphasizing with Soledad, there are a series of obligations to do or not to do, and they need to be complied with. But there are other obligations that appeal to this co-responsibility of care that we promote in Latin America. There are obligations within the family that require that distribution that doesn't exist. Soledad was talking about the pandemic. The pandemic allows us, with the colleagues, we call it the syndemia. No one can't, nobody knows what happens in the home, but we went back in time. And this is an alarming issue. But also on social and community organizations, we have experienced that they are burdened by solving, because they need to solve when the state is not meeting their obligations. And we can't discard the obligations that are the obligation of the market. Businesses have eluded some of those obligations. So we need social co-responsibility about care and to promote that interdependence between the care to food and the right to care and the right to food. Soledad, thank you very much for the question. Before answering the question, I would like to greet Areli, because it's just wonderful to have a person who cares for to have a person that cares for nature within us. So I guess with Laura and you, we felt her presence, her capability of being a seed guardian, being able to care for everything, not, even the Pachamama. And I had the opportunity to work in an effort for in Colombia, that they have these standards on the free use of seeds. So I think it's timely to share this information with the audience. Now, with respect to the obligations of states, with respect to the right to care, we also ask about the right to food, although they are acknowledged. So, but we are waiting to what the Inter-American Court has to say about human rights. But from the work that we have conducted together with the Commission, care is from the Inter-American system. It generates the same obligations to states that other human rights that they are called to respect and to guarantee, but to being a right that is to the maximum of the resources available. And these are rights of progressive development. So we need to demystify this progressive right does not mean due to the fact that other rights are all fall together. These are the rights for which states have to destine the maximum resources. That's why it's so important to talk about economic policies, fiscal policies, budgets of states to see whether the states are meeting their obligations. With Laura and other colleagues, we've been working very powerfully, a very potent work to measure that this progress around this. And on the other hand, the committee, when they talk about what are the responsibility of the states with respect to the contract, social contract of policies, social economic policies, they should have minimum context that must be ensured or guaranteed. Not only if their rights of progressive rights, the states still have a responsibility, but I think the court will provide more clarity. But I would like to talk about the responsibility of the states to the action of businesses and other actors. There is in United Nations, Maria, who was in one other panel, there's a UN talk of so businesses need to be accountable internationally. So from this report that was a pioneer on human rights, we analyze what are the responsibilities of the states with respect to human rights, including the right to care, the right to food. And I would like to, whoever asked the questions could access that report that was prepared under my mandate that includes the right to care and the standards that have been developed to then by the Inter-American Commission. Thank you, Soledad, Laura, Areli, for your reflections. We have had a very enriching conversation from the experiences in the territory to the development of international standards. We don't have any more time. We will need to follow this conversation. I would like to thank you, the interpreters. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Teresa so you can close the seminar. Thank you, Denise, and thank you for this wonderful dialogue. I would like to thank the interpreters and thank you for giving us this 5 minutes. I'd like to capture some key words about the dialogue that would reflect the complexity. So let us begin with this.
By listening to a song that talked about the mirrors, and particularly a phrase that said, the mirror that shakes us up and reveals sounds to us. And throughout these 3 hours, we have been listening to the sounds that care has, the diverse voice, the diverse experiences around care. Care is a tension between the inside and the outside. Care is having space to be upset, to plant the seeds that we carry in our hair, those seeds that are power. Caring is having space to decolonize, to recognize the historic error of the caregivers, to have space to relate reciprocity, interdependent relations that will look at an intersectional approach, knowing that there's not one only recipe for all. It's about building these relations, politicizing these relations, because caring means generating autonomy, means generating legal, regulatory relationships in this care between food and nutrition so that they're reflected in policies. It means redistributing power, connecting experience, connecting the ancestral structures. It means to make visible what already exists, to protect, to strengthen, to share. Caring is revindicating for human lives and non-human lives. It's to vindicate the protagonic role of women. Caring is not only having a space, it's also having the time in this tension between the inside and the outside, between what is the family and what the community is. It's time to understand that perhaps before and outside oppression, we have to look for data in order to become visible, and that these data and these new measurement tools have to take into account the material and immaterial territory. Putting at the center a recognition of the value before putting a price on it. Caring. Time that we need to accompany these evolutionary regulatory process that will link human rights in their interdependencies, particularly the right to care and the right to food. Without one, there's not the other one. We need time to give visibility to the political will to include in the public agenda transformative changes on how we tackle human rights and to what extent do we recognize care with governance forms that we put at the center multi-actor architectures and the subjects of rights so that these economic, political, and cultural transformation can proceed in a livable and visible way. We need time to build a comprehensive view and a look at this. It is not integrating or. From a feminist point of view, we must be able to say that we want to provide care and that we are entitled to care and we have a right to food, that we want to expand the limited understanding of this, and we need space and time to recognize, to respect, to resist, to redistribute, to reduce, to represent, to reformulate, to reconceptualize in a radical way the care, the self-care, and being cared. A million thanks to FIAN Colombia and Urgency for organizing this first dialogue. We can attest to the fact, according to the comments, that other dialogues will follow, and then the perspectives of the indigenous peoples will continue being involved and made visible and found in the subsequent dialogues that will be coming. And we're aware of the importance of the complexity and the relationships. We want to thank all of you following us on live, mainstreaming, YouTube, where these first dialogue will be recorded. And my thanks to all the panelists, and especially to the interpreters that took such good care of us in the semantic part of our words. My thanks to the whole team of Young Colombia that has been in the invisible care side of things and that succeeded in having our virtual presence around this continent. Thank you for caring before, during, and after. And for me, Teresa from FIAN Internacional, I really want to thank you all and thank you for enriching me very much today. So the best of our greetings, and we'll be looking forward to telling you about the next steps. Thank you.
Voy a contar una historia muy bonita que está pasando en los barrios de Cartagena y hombre, en los barrios de Cartagena y hombre, en los barrios de Cartagena. Varias mujeres y Consuelo Arnaiz inventaron un espejo bonito, ay hombre, un espejo bonito, ay hombre, un espejo bonito. Donde se miran las mujeres y sus mundos con sus penas y sus alegrías, hombre, penas y alegrías, hombre, penas y alegrías. Mujeres espejo somos y aquí reímos. Mujeres espejo somos y aquí lloramos. Mujeres espejo somos y aquí cantamos. Mujeres espejo somos y aquí bailamos. El espejo no te miente, él te dice, él te grita la inclemente realidad.